Book. Chapter 19. Ulysses recognized by Eurycleia. Removal of the weapons from the hall by Ulysses and his son, interview of Penelope and Ulysses, who tells her that he has seen her husband in Crete. Describes his person and dress, and affirms that within a month he will be in Ithaca, the bath administered to Ulysses by Eurycleia, who recognizes him by a scar on his leg, narrative of the manner in which the scar was caused. Now was the godlike chief Ulysses left in his own palace, planning, with the aid of Pallas, to destroy the suitor train. And thus bespake his son with winged words. Now is the time, Telemachus, to take the weapons that are here, and store them up in the inner rooms. Then, if the suitors ask the reason, answer them with specious words. Say, I have put them where there comes no smoke. Since even now they do not seem the arms left by Ulysses when he sailed for Troy. So tarnished are they by the breath of fire. And yet another reason sways my mind. The prompting of some god, that ye, when flushed with wine and in the heat of a dispute, may smite and wound each other, and disgrace the banquet and your wooing. For the sight of steel doth draw men on to violence. He ended, and Telemachus obeyed his father's words, and calling forth his nurse, the aged Eurycleia, said to her, Go, nurse, and see the women all shut up in their own place, while in our inner room I lay away my father's beautiful arms, neglected long, and sullied by the smoke, while he was absent. I was then a child, but now would keep them from the breath of fire. And thus the nurse, Dame Eurycleia, said, Would that at length, my child, thou didst exert thy proper wisdom here, and take in charge thy house and thy possessions. But who goes with thee to bear a torch, since none of these thy handmaids are allowed to light thy way? And thus discreet Telemachus replied, This stranger, no man may be idle here, who eats my bread, though from a distant land. He spake, nor flew his words in vain. The nurse closed all the portals of that noble pile. Ulysses and his glorious son in haste bore off the helmets, and the bossy shields, and the sharp spears, while Pallas held to them a golden lamp, that shed a fair clear light. Then to his father spake Telemachus, Father, my eyes behold a marvel. All the palace walls, each beautiful recess, the fir tree beams, the aspiring columns, shine before my eyes, as with a blaze of fire. Some god is surely here, some one of those who make their dwelling in the high broad heaven. Ulysses, the sagacious, answered thus, Keep silence. Give thy thought no speech, nor ask concerning aught. Such is the wont of those who dwell upon Olympus. Now withdraw to rest upon thy couch, while I remain. For I would move thy mother and her maids to ask of what concerns me. She, I deem, full sadly will inquire of many things. He spake, Telemachus departed thence by torchlight, to his chamber, there to rest, where he was wont to lie when gentle sleep came over him. There lay he down to wait the hallowed morning, while Ulysses, left within the palace, meditated still death to the suitors with Minerva's aid. The sage Penelope now left her bower. Like Dian or like golden Venus came the queen. Beside the hearth they placed for her the throne where she was wont to sit, inlaid with ivory and silver, which of yore the artisan Icmalius wrought. They laid close to the throne a footstool, over which was spread an ample fleece. On this sat down the sage Penelope. Her white-armed train of handmaids came with her. They cleared away the abundant feast, and bore the tables off, and cups from which those insolent men had drunk. They laid upon the ground the lighted brands, and heaped fresh fuel round them, both for light and warmth. And now Melantho once again bespake Ulysses with unmannerly words. Stranger, wilt thou forever be a pest, ranging the house at night to play the spy upon the women? Leave the hall, thou wretch, and gorge thyself without, else wilt thou go. Suddenly, driven by blows and flaming brands, the sage Ulysses frowned on her, and said, Pert creature, why so fiercely rail at me? Is it that I am squalid and ill-clad, and forced by want to beg from hand to hand? Such is the fate of poor and wandering men. I too was opulent once, inhabiting a plenteous home among my fellow-men, and often gave the wanderer alms, whoe'er he might be and in whatsoever need. And I had many servants, and large store of things by which men lead a life of ease, and are called rich. But Jupiter, the son of Saturn, put an end to this, for so it pleased the god. Now, therefore, woman, think that thou mayst lose the beauty which is now thy pride among the serving women here. Thy mistress may be wroth, and make thy life a hard one. Or Ulysses may come back, and there is hope of that. Or if it be that he has perished, and returns no more, there still remains his son Telemachus, who by Apollo's grace is now a man. And no one of the women in these halls may think to misbehave, and yet escape his eye, for he no longer is a boy. He spake, Penelope, the prudent, heard, and, calling to her maid, rebuked her thus. O bold and shameless, I have taken note of thy behavior. Thou hast done a wrong, for which thy head should answer. Well thou knowst, for thou hast heard me say, that I would ask the stranger in these halls if aught he knows of my Ulysses, for whose sake I grieve. Then to the matron of the household turned the queen, and thus bespake Eurycleia. Bring now a seat, Eurycleia, and spread a fleece upon it, where the stranger guest may sit at ease, and hear what I shall say, and answer me, for I have much to ask. She spake, the ancient handmaid brought with speed a polished seat, and o'er it spread a fleece. Ulysses, much enduring chief, sat down. And thus the sage Penelope began. First will I ask thee who thou art, and whence. Where is thy birthplace, and thy parents who? Ulysses, the sagacious, answered thus. O lady, none in all the boundless earth can speak of thee with blame. Thy fame has reached to the great heavens. It is like the renown of some most excellent king, of godlike sway, o'er many men and mighty, who upholds justice in all his realm. The dark-soiled earth brings wheat and barley forth. The trees are bowed with fruit, the meadows swarm with noble herds. The sea with fish, and under his wise reign the people prosper. Therefore ask, I pray, of other things, while I am underneath thy palace roof, but of my race and home. Inquire not, lest thou waken in my mind unhappy memories. I am a man of sorrow, and it would become me ill to sit lamenting in another's house, and shedding tears. Besides, a grief indulged doth grow in violence. Thy maids would blame, and thou perhaps, and ye would call my tears the maudlin tears of one o'ercome with wine. Then spake the sage Penelope again. Stranger, such grace of feature and of form as once I had the immortals took away. What time the Argive warriors sailed for Troy, and my Ulysses with them. Could he now return to rule my household as of yore? The wider and the brighter were my fame. But now I lead a wretched life, so great, and many are the evils which some god heaps on me. For the chieftains who bear sway over the isles, Dulichium, and the fields of Samos, and Zacynthus dark with woods, and those who rule in sunny Ithaca, woo me against my will, and waste away my substance. Therefore have I small regard for strangers and for suppliants, and the tribe of heralds, servants of the public weal. But, pining for Ulysses, wear away my life. The suitors urge the marriage rite, and I with art delay it. Once some god prompted me to begin an ample web, wide and of subtle texture, in my rooms. And then I said, youths, who are pressing me to marriage, since Ulysses is no more, urge me no further till I shall complete, that so the threads may not be spun in vain, this shroud for old Laertes, when grim fate and death's long sleep at last shall overtake the hero. Else among the multitude of Grecian women I shall bear the blame, if one whose ample wealth so well was known should lie in death without a funeral robe. I spake, and easily their minds were swayed by what I said, and I began to weave the ample web, but revelled it again by torchlight every evening. For 3 years I foiled them thus. But when the 4th year came, and brought its train of hours and changing moons, and many days had passed, they came on me, and through my maiden's fault, a careless crew, they caught me at my fraud, and chid me sore. So, though unwilling, I was forced to end my task, and cannot longer now escape the marriage, nor is any refuge left. My parents both exhort me earnestly to choose a husband, and my son with grief beholds the suitors wasting his estate, and he already is a man and well can rule his household. Jupiter bestows such honor on him. Now, I pray, declare thy lineage, for thou surely art not sprung from the old fabulous oak, nor from a rock. Ulysses, the sagacious, answered her, O royal consort of Laertes' son, wilt thou still ask my lineage? I will then disclose it, but thou wakest in my heart new sorrows. So it ever is with one who long, like me, is far away from home, wandering in many realms, and suffering much. But since thou dost require it, thou shalt hear. Crete is a region lying in the midst of the black deep, a fair and fruitful land, girt by the waters. Many are the men, nay, numberless, who make it their abode, and 90 are its cities. Different tongues are spoken by the dwellers of the isle. In part they are Achaeans, and in part are Cretans of the soil, a gallant stock. There dwell Sidonians, Dorians of 3 tribes, and proud Pelasgians. Their great capital is Knossos, where the monarch Minos dwelt, he who at every 9 years' end conferred with Jove Almighty, and to him was born Deucalion, my brave father, who begot me and Idomeneus, the king of Crete. To Ilium in his beaked galleys sailed Idomeneus with Atreus' sons. My name, a name well known, is Ethon. 'Twas at Crete I saw Ulysses, who received from me the welcome due a guest. A violent wind had driven him from Malliae and the course that led to Ilium, and had carried him to Crete, and lodged him in the dangerous port Amnisus, close to Ilithia's cave. where scarce his fleet escaped the hurricane. Thence came he to the city, and inquired for King Idomeneus, who was, he said, his dear and honored guest. But he had sailed 10 days before, perhaps 11, for Troy, in his beaked galleys, to the palace there. I led Ulysses, and with liberal cheer welcomed the chief, for plentifully stored the royal dwelling was. I also gave meal from the public magazines to him, and those who followed him, and dark red wine, brought from the country round, and beeves to slay in sacrifice, that so their hearts might feel no lack of aught. 12 days the noble Greeks remained with us. A violent north wind, which scarcely suffered them to stand upright on shore, withstood them. Some unfriendly power had bid it blow. But on the 13th day its fury ceased, and the fleet put to sea. Thus went he on, inventing tales that seemed like truth. She listened, melting into tears that flowed as when on mountain height the snow, shed by the west wind, feels the east wind's breath, and flows in water, and the hurrying streams are filled. So did Penelope's fair cheeks seem to dissolve in tears, tears shed for him who sat beside her. Even then he saw his weeping wife, and pitied her at heart. Yet were his eyes like iron or like horn, and moved not in their lids, for artfully he kept his tears from falling. When the queen had ceased to weep, she answered him and said, Now, stranger, let me prove thee, if in truth thou didst receive, as thou hast just declared, in thine abode, my husband and his train of noble friends. Describe the garb he wore. How looked he, and the friends he brought with him? Ulysses, the sagacious, answered her. O lady, hard it is to answer thee. So long have I been far away from home. 'Tis now the 20th year since he was there, and left the isle, but, as my memory bids, so will I speak. A fleecy purple cloak Ulysses wore, a double web. The clasp was golden, with 2 fastenings, and in front it showed a work of rare design, a hound that held in his forepaws a spotted fawn, struggling before his open mouth. Although the figures were of gold, we all admired the hound intent to break his victim's neck, the fawn that, writhing, plied her nimble feet to free herself. Around the hero's chest and waist I saw a lustrous tunic worn, soft, like the thin film of the onion dried, and bright as sunshine. Many ladies looked with wonder on it. Yet consider this. I know not whether thus attired he left his home, or whether, in the voyage thence, some comrade gave the garments, or perhaps some friendly host, for he was very dear to many. Among the Greeks were few like him. I gave him, from myself, a brazen sword, and a fair purple cloak, a double web, besides a tunic reaching to his feet, and with due honors sent him on his way. In his good ship there came and went with him a herald somewhat older than himself. Let me portray him, hunchbacked, swarthy-skinned, and curly-haired, Eurybates his name. Ulysses honored him above the rest of his companions, for they thought alike. He ceased. The queen was moved to deeper grief, for she remembered all the tokens well, of which he spake. And when that passionate gust of weeping ceased, she spake again and said, Stranger, till now thy presence in these halls has only moved my pity. Thou henceforth art dear and honored. It was I who gave the garments thou hast told me of. These hands folded them in my chamber. I put on the glittering clasp to be his ornament. And now I never shall behold him more, returning to his own dear land and home. So cruel was the fate that took him hence to Ilium, in his roomy ship, a town of evil omen never to be named. Ulysses, the sagacious, answered thus: O gracious consort of Laertes' son, let not thy grief for him whom thou hast lost wither thy beauty longer, and consume thy heart. And yet I blame thee not at all for any wife in losing him to whom she gave herself while yet a maid, and bore children, will mourn him, though he be in worth below Ulysses, who, as fame declares, is like the gods. But cease to grieve, and hear what I shall say, and I shall speak the truth. Nor will I hide from thee that I have heard but lately from Ulysses, yet alive, and journeying homeward in the opulent realm of the Thesprotians, whence he brings with him much and rare treasure, gathered there among the people. His beloved friends he lost, and his good ship, the black deep swallowed them. In coming from Trinacria, for his crew had slaughtered there the oxen of the sun. The sun and Jove were angry, therefore all his comrades perished in the billowy sea. But him upon his galley's keel the wind drove to the coast where the Phaeacians dwell, the kinsmen of the gods. They welcomed him, and honored him as if he were a god, and gave him many things, and would have sent the hero safely to his native isle. And here Ulysses would have been long since, but that he deemed it wise to travel far, and gather wealth, for well Ulysses knew, beyond all other men, the arts of gain, and none in these could think to rival him. So Phaedon, king of the Thesprotians said, who also, in his palace, swore to me, as to the gods of heaven he poured the wine, that even then a galley was drawn down into the water, and already manned with rowers, who should take Ulysses home. But me he first dismissed, for at the time a bark of the Thesprotians left the port, bound for Dulichium's cornfields. Ere I went, he showed the treasures of Ulysses stored in the king's palace, treasures that might serve to feed the household of another chief to the 10th generation. He who owned that wealth was at Dodona, so the king declared, inquiring, at the lofty oak of Jupiter, the counsel of the god, how to return to his dear native land. So long a wanderer, whether openly or else by stealth, so he is safe, and soon will he be nearer to us, for not long can he remain away from all his friends and fatherland. To this I plight my oath. Let Jove, the greatest and the best of gods, be witness, and this hearth of the good prince Ulysses, where I sit, that every word which I have said to thee will be fulfilled. Within the year Ulysses will return, as this month passes and the next comes in. Then spake the sage Penelope again. Would that it might be thus, O stranger guest, as thou hast said. Then shouldst thou have such thanks and bounty at my hands that everyone who meets thee should rejoice with thee. And yet the thought abides with me, and so indeed it must be, that Ulysses will no more return, nor wilt thou find an escort hence. For now no master like Ulysses rules. And what a man was he, within these walls, to welcome or dismiss the honored guest. But now, ye maidens, let the stranger bathe, and spread his couch with blankets, fleecy cloaks, and showy tapestries, that he may lie warm till the morning, in her golden car. Draw near. Then with the early morn again bathe and anoint him, that he may sit down Beside Telemachus prepared to take his morning meal. Ill shall he fare who dares molest the stranger. He shall have no place or office here, however he may rage. And how, O stranger, wouldst thou learn that I, in mind and thoughtful wisdom, am above all other women, if I let thee sit squalid and meanly clad at banquets here? Short is the life of man, and whoso bears a cruel heart, devising cruel things, on him men call down evil from the gods, while living, and pursue him, when he dies, with scoffs. But whoso is of generous heart, and harbors generous aims, his guests proclaim his praises far and wide to all mankind, and numberless are they who call him good. Ulysses, the sagacious, answered thus: O gracious consort of Laertes' son, such cloaks and splendid coverings please me not, since in my long-oared bark I left behind the snowy peaks of Crete. I still will lie, as I am wont through many a sleepless night, on a mean couch to wait the holy morn, upon her car of gold. I do not like this washing of the feet. No maiden here that ministers to thee may touch my foot. But if among them be some aged dame, and faithful, who has suffered in her life, as I have suffered, she may touch my feet. And thus the sage Penelope rejoined: Dear guest, for never to these halls has come a stranger so discreet or better liked by me, so wisely thou dost speak. And well, I have an aged prudent dame, whose care reared my unfortunate husband. She received the nursling when his mother brought him forth, and she, though small her strength, will wash thy feet. Rise, prudent Eurycleia, thou shalt wash the feet of one whose years must be the same as thy own master's, such is doubtless now Ulysses, with such wrinkled feet and hands. For quickly doth misfortune make men old. She spake. The aged handmaid hid her face with both her hands, and, shedding bitter tears, thus sorrowfully to the queen replied: My heart is sad for thee, my son, and yet I can do nothing. Can it be that Jove hates thee beyond all other, though thyself so reverent to the gods? No man on earth has burned so many thighs of fatling beasts, and chosen hecatombs as thou to Jove, the thunderer, with prayer that thou mayst reach a calm old age, and rear thy glorious son to manhood. Yet the god hath cut thee off from thy return forever. Even now, perchance the women of some princely house, which he has entered in some distant land, scoff at him as these wretched creatures scoff at thee, O stranger, who, to shun their taunts and insults, wilt not suffer them to wash thy feet. The sage Penelope commands, and I am not unwilling. I will wash thy feet, both for her sake and for thy own. For deeply am I moved at sight of thee. Hear what I say, of strangers in distress. Come many hither, yet have I beheld no one who bears, in shape and voice and feet, such likeness to our absent lord as thou. Ulysses, the sagacious, thus replied: O aged woman, so has it been said by all who have beheld both him and me. They all declare that we are very like each other. Thou in this hast spoken well. He spake, she took a shining vase designed for washing feet, and poured cold water in large abundance, and warm water next. Ulysses, who had sat before the hearth, moved to a darker spot, for in his mind the thought arose that she might find a scar upon his limbs in handling them, and thus his secret would be known. She came and bathed his feet, and found the scar. 'Twas where a boar with his white tooth had gashed the limb, as once he journeyed to Parnassus, where he paid a visit to Autolycus and his sons, his mother's noble father, who excelled all men in craft and oaths. Such was the gift conferred on him by Hermes. For to him Autolycus made grateful offerings, the thighs of lambs and kids, and evermore the god was with him. Once Autolycus came to the opulent realm of Ithaca, and found his daughter with a son new born. There Eurycleia placed upon his knees the infant, just as he had supped, and said, "Give this dear babe, Autolycus, a name. Thy daughter's son, vouchsafed to many prayers." And thus Autolycus in answer spake, "Daughter and son-in-law, be his the name that I shall give. In coming to his isle, I bear the hate of many, both of men and women, scattered o'er the nourishing earth. Name him Ulysses therefore, and when, grown to man's estate, he visits the proud halls, reared at Parnassus, where his mother dwelt, and my possessions lie, I will bestow a share on him, and send him home rejoiced." And therefore went Ulysses to receive the promised princely gifts. Autolycus and all his sons received him with kind words and friendly grasp of hands. Amphithea there, his mother's mother, took him in her arms, and kissed his brow and both his beautiful eyes. Then to his noble sons Autolycus called to prepare a feast, and they obeyed. They brought and slew a steer of 5 years old, and flayed and dressed it, hewed the joints apart, and sliced the flesh, and fixed it upon spits, roasted it carefully, and gave to each his part. So all the day till set of sun they feasted, to the full content of all. And when the sun had set, and earth grew dark, they laid them down, and took the gift of sleep. But when the rosy-fingered morn appeared, born of the dawn, forth issued the young men, the children of Autolycus, with hounds, to hunt, attended by their noble guest, Ulysses. Up the steeps of that high mount, Parnassus, clothed with woods, they climbed, and soon were on its airy heights. The sun, new risen from the deep ocean's gently flowing stream, now smote the fields. The hunters reached a dell. The hounds before them tracked the game. Behind followed the children of Autolycus. The generous youth Ulysses, brandishing a spear of mighty length, came pressing on. Close to the hounds there lay a huge wild boar, within a thicket, where moist blowing winds came not, nor in his brightness could the sun pierce with his beams the covert, nor the rain pelt through. So closely grew the shrubs. The ground was heaped with sheddings of the withered leaves. Around him came the noise of dogs and men approaching swiftly. From his lair he sprang, and faced them, with the bristles on his neck, upright, and flashing eyes. Ulysses rushed before the others, with the ponderous spear raised high in his strong hand, intent to smite. The boar was first to strike. He dealt a blow sidelong, and gashed his foe above the knee, and tore the flesh, but left untouched the bone. Ulysses, striking with his burnished spear the boar's right shoulder, drove the weapon through. He fell with piercing cries amid the dust, and the life left him. Then around their guest, the kindly children of Autolycus came and bound up with care the wound, and stanched with spells the dark blood of the blameless youth, and hastened with him to their father's home. And when Autolycus and they his sons had seen him wholly healed, they loaded him with presents, and, rejoicing for his sake, sent him rejoicing back to Ithaca. His father and his gracious mother there rejoiced in turn, and asked him of the scar, and how it came. And he related all. How by the white tusk of a savage boar the wound was given on the Parnassian heights, as he was hunting with her father's sons. The aged woman, as she took the foot into her hands, perceived by touch the scar, and, letting fall the limb, it struck the vase. Loud rang the brass, the vase was overturned, and poured the water forth. At once a rush of gladness and of grief came o'er her heart. Tears filled her eyes, and her clear voice was choked. She touched Ulysses on the chin, and said, "Dear child, thou art Ulysses, of a truth. I knew thee not till I had touched the scar." So speaking, toward Penelope she turned her eyes, about to tell her that her lord was in the palace. But the queen saw not, and all that passed was unperceived by her. For Pallas turned her thoughts another way. Meantime, Ulysses on the nurse's throat laid his right hand, and with the other drew the aged woman nearer him, and said, "Nurse, wouldst thou ruin me, who drew long since milk from thy bosom, and who now return, after much suffering borne for 20 years, to mine own land? Now then, since thou hast learned the truth, by prompting of some god, no doubt, keep silence, lest some others in the house should learn it also. Else, I tell thee this, and will perform my word, if God permit, that I o'ercome the arrogant suitor crew. Nurse as thou art, I spare not even thee, when in these halls the other maidens die." Then thus the prudent Eurycleia said, "What words, my son, have passed thy lips? For well thou knowest my firm mind, it never yields. Like solid rock or steel I keep my trust. This let me tell thee, and, I pray thee, keep my words in mind. If, by the aid of God, thou overcome the arrogant suitor crew, then will I name the handmaids that disgrace thy household, and point out the innocent." Ulysses, the sagacious, thus rejoined, "Why name them, nurse? It needs not. I myself shall watch them, and shall know them all. Hold thou thy peace, and leave the issue with the gods." He spake, the aged woman left the place to bring a second bath, for on the floor the first was spilled. When she had bathed his feet and made them smooth with oil, Ulysses drew close to the hearth his seat again, to take the warmth, and with his tatters hid the scar. And thus the sage Penelope began, "Stranger, but little longer will I yet inquire. The hour of grateful rest is near, for those who, though unhappy, can receive the balm of slumber. Yet for me some god appoints immeasurable grief. All day, in sorrows and in sighs, my solace is to oversee my maidens at their tasks here in the palace. But when evening comes, and all betake themselves to rest, I lie upon my couch, and sorrows thick and sharp awake new misery in my heart. As when, in the fresh spring, the swarthy nightingale, daughter of Pandarus, among thick leaves, sings sweetly to the woods, and, changing oft the strain, pours forth her voice of many notes, lamenting the beloved Italus, her son by royal Zethus, whom she smote unwittingly, and slew with such quick change. My mind is tossed from thought to thought. I muse whether to keep my place beside my son, and hold what here is mine, my dower, my maids, and high-roofed halls, as one who still reveres her husband's bed, and heeds the public voice, Or follow one of the Achaean chiefs, the noblest of the wooers, and the one who offers marriage presents without stint. My son's green years, while he was yet a boy, unripe in mind, allowed me not to wed, and leave his father's home, but he is grown, and on the verge of manhood. He desires that I should leave the palace, for his wrath is great against the men who waste his wealth. Hear, and interpret now a dream of mine. Within these courts are 20 geese that eat corn from the water, and I look on them, pleased and amused. From off a mountain came a hook-beaked eagle, broke their necks, and left their bodies strewn about the palace dead, and soared again into the air of heaven. I wept and moaned, although it was a dream. And round me came the fair-haired Grecian maids, lamenting wildly that the bird of prey had slain my geese. Then came the eagle back, and took his perch upon the jutting roof, and thus bespake me in a human voice. O daughter of Icarius, the renowned, let not thy heart be troubled. This is not a dream, but a true vision, and will be fulfilled. The geese denote the suitor train, and I, who was an eagle once, am come, thy husband, now to end them utterly. He spake, my slumbers left me, and I looked, and saw the geese that in the palace still were at their trough, and feeding as before. And thus Ulysses, the sagacious, said, Lady, the dream that visited thy sleep cannot be wrested to another sense. Ulysses has himself revealed to thee the way of its fulfillment. Death is near the suitors, and not one escapes his doom. Then spake the sage Penelope again. Of dreams, O stranger, some are meaningless and idle, and can never be fulfilled. 2 portals are there for their shadowy shapes, of ivory one, and one of horn. The dreams that come through the carved ivory deceive, with promises that never are made good. But those which pass the doors of polished horn, and are beheld of men, are ever true. And yet I cannot hope that my strange dream came through them, though my son and I would both rejoice if it were so. This let me say, and heed me well. Tomorrow brings to us the hateful morn which takes me from my home, the palace of Ulysses. I shall now propose a contest. In the palace court, Ulysses in a row set up 12 stakes, like props that hold a galley up. Each stake had its own ring. He stood afar, and sent an arrow through them all. I shall propose this contest to the suitors. He who bends the bow with easy mastery, and sends through the 12 rings an arrow, I will take to follow from the palace where I passed my youthful married life, a beautiful home, and stored with wealth, a home which I shall long remember, even in my nightly dreams. Ulysses, the sagacious, answered thus. O gracious consort of Laertes' son, let not this contest be delayed. The man of ready wiles, Ulysses, will be here. Ere, tampering with the hero's polished bow, the suitors shall prevail to stretch the cord, and send an arrow through the rings of steel. And thus the sage Penelope rejoined. Stranger, if, sitting in the palace here, thou still wouldst entertain me as thou dost, sleep would not fall upon my lids. And yet, sleepless the race of mortals cannot be. So have the gods ordained, who measure out his lot to man upon the nourishing earth. I to the upper rooms withdraw, to take my place upon the couch which has become to me a place of sorrow and of tears. Since my Ulysses went away to Troy, that fatal town which should be named no more. And I will lay me down, but thou remain within these walls, and make the floor thy bed. Or let these maidens spread a couch for thee. Penelope, thus having spoken, went up to her royal bower, but not alone. Her maids went with her. When they were within, she wept for her dear husband, till at length the blue-eyed Pallas graciously distilled upon her closing lids the balm of sleep. Book. Chapter 20. The Last Banquet of the Suitors. Disorderly conduct of the serving women, prayer of Ulysses for a favorable omen, its fulfillment, preparations for a feast of the suitors in the palace, the feast, Ulysses insulted by Tisippus, who is reproved by Telemachus, strange prodigies observed by Theoclymenus, who leaves the hall. The noble chief, Ulysses, in the porch, lay down to rest. An undressed bullock's hide was under him, and over that the skins of sheep, which for the daily sacrifice the Achaeans slew. Eurycleia had spread a cloak above him. There he lay awake, and meditated how he yet should smite the suitors down. Meantime, with cries of mirth and laughter, came the women forth to seek the suitors' arms. Ulysses, inly moved with anger, pondered whether he should rise and put them all to death, or give their shame a respite for another night, the last. His heart raged in his bosom, as a hound growls, walking round her whelps, when she beholds a stranger, and is eager for the attack. So growled his heart within him, and so fierce was his impatience with that shameless crew. He smote his breast, and thus he chid his heart. Endure it, heart. Thou didst bear worse than this, when the grim Cyclops of resistless strength devoured thy brave companions, thou couldst still endure, till thou by stratagem didst leave the cave in which it seemed that thou must die. Thus he rebuked his heart, and, growing calm, his heart submitted, but the hero tossed from side to side, as when one turns and turns the stomach of a bullock filled with fat and blood before a fiercely blazing fire, and wishes it were done. So did the chief shift oft from side to side, while pondering how to lay a strong hand on the multitude of shameless suitors, he but one, and they so many. Meantime Pallas, sliding down from heaven, in form a woman, came, and there beside his bed stood over him, and spake. Why, most unhappy of the sons of men, art thou still sleepless? This is thine abode, and here thou hast thy consort and a son, whom any man might covet for his own. Ulysses, the sagacious, answered thus. Truly, O goddess, all that thou hast said is rightly spoken. This perplexes me, how to lay hands upon these shameless men, when I am only one, and they a throng that fill the palace. Yet another thought, and mightier still, if, by thy aid and Jove's, I slay the suitors, how shall I myself be safe thereafter? Think, I pray, of this. And thus in turn the blue-eyed Pallas said, O faint of spirit, in an humbler friend than I am, in a friend of mortal birth, and less far-seeing, one might put his trust. But I am born a goddess, and protect thy life in every danger. Let me say, and plainly say, if 50 armed bands of men should gather round us, eager all to take thy life, thou mightest drive away, unharmed by them, their herds and pampered flocks. But give thyself to sleep. To wake and watch all night is most unwholesome. Thou shalt find a happy issue from thy troubles yet. She spake, and, shedding slumber on his lids, upward the glorious goddess took her way back to Olympus, when she saw that sleep had seized him, making him forget all care, and slackening every limb. His faithful wife was still awake, and sat upright and wept on her soft couch, and after many tears, the glorious lady prayed to Dian thus: Goddess august, Diana, child of Jove, I would that thou wouldst send into my heart a shaft to take my life, or that a storm would seize and hurl me through the paths of air, and cast me into ocean's restless streams, as once a storm, descending, swept away the daughters born to Pandarus. The gods had slain their parents, and they dwelt alone, as orphans in their palace, nourished there by blessed Venus with the curds of milk, and honey, and sweet wine, while Juno gave beauty and wit beyond all womankind, and chaste Diana dignity of form, and Pallas every art that graces life. Then, as the blessed Venus went to ask for them, of Jove the Thunderer, on the heights of his Olympian mount, the crowning gift of happy marriage, for to Jove is known whatever comes to pass, and what shall be the fortune, good or ill, of mortal men. The Harpies came meantime, bore off the maids, and gave them to the hateful sisterhood of Furies as their servants. So may those who dwell upon Olympus make an end of me, or fair-haired Dian strike me down, that, with the image of Ulysses still before my mind, I may not seek to please one of less worth. This evil might be borne by one who weeps all day, and feels at heart a settled sorrow, yet can sleep at night. For sleep, when once it weighs the eyelids down, makes men unmindful both of good and ill, and all things else. But me some deity visits with fearful dreams. There lay by me this very night one like him, as he was when with his armed men he sailed for Troy. And I was glad, for certainly I deemed it was a real presence, and no dream. She spake. Just then, upon her car of gold appeared the morn. The great Ulysses heard that voice of lamentation, anxiously he mused. It seemed to him as if the queen stood over him and knew him, gathering up in haste the cloak and skins on which he slept. He laid them in the palace on a seat, but bore the bull's hide forth in open air, and lifted up his hands and prayed to Jove. O Father Jove, and all the gods, if ye have led me graciously, o'er land and deep, across the earth, and, after suffering much, to mine own isle, let one of those who watch within the palace speak some ominous word, and grant a sign from thee without these walls. So prayed he. All-providing Jupiter hearkened, and thundered from the clouds around the bright Olympian peaks. Ulysses heard with gladness from a room within the house, in which the mills of the king's household stood, a woman, laboring at the quern, gave forth an omen also. There were 12 who toiled in making flour of barley and of wheat, the strength of man. The rest were all asleep. Their tasks were done. One only, of less strength than any other there, kept toiling on. She paused a moment, stopped the whirling stone, and spake these words, a portent for the king. O Father Jove, the king of gods and men, thou hast just thundered from the starry heaven, and yet there is no cloud to someone here. It is a portent. O perform for me, all helpless as I am, this one request. Let now the suitors in this palace take their last and final pleasant feast today. These men who make my limbs, with constant toil, in grinding corn for them, to lose their strength. Once let them banquet here, and then no more. She spake, the omen of the woman's words. And Jove's loud thunder pleased Ulysses well. And now he deemed he should avenge himself upon the guilty ones. The other maids of that fair palace of Ulysses woke, and came together, and upon the hearth kindled a steady fire. Telemachus rose from his bed in presence like a god, put on his garments, hung his trenchant sword upon his shoulder, tied to his fair feet the shapely sandals, took his massive spear, tipped with sharp brass, and, stopping as he reached the threshold, spake to Eurycleia thus. Dear nurse, have ye with honor fed and lodged our guest? Or have ye suffered him to find a lodging where he might, without your care? Discerning as she is, my mother pays high honor to the worse among her guests, and sends the nobler man unhonored hence. And thus the prudent Eurycleia said, My child, blame not thy mother, she deserves no blame. The stranger sat and drank his wine, all that he would, and said, when pressed to eat, that he desired no more. And when he thought of sleep, she bade her maiden spread his couch. But he refused a bed and rugs, like one inured to misery, and beneath the porch slept on an undressed bull's hide and the skins of sheep, and over him we cast a cloak. She spake, Telemachus, his spear in hand, went forth, his fleet dogs following him. He sought the council where the well-grieved Greeks were met. Meantime the noble Eurycleia, child of Ops, Pisenner's son, bespake the maids. Come, some of you, at once, and sweep the floor, and sprinkle it, and on the shapely thrones spread coverings of purple tapestry. Let others wipe the tables with a sponge, and cleanse the beakers and the double cups, while others go for water to the fount, and bring it quickly. For not long today the suitors will be absent from these halls. They will come early to the general feast. She spake. The handmaids hearkened and obeyed. And 20 went to the dark well to draw the water, while the others busily bestirred themselves about the house. Then came the servants of the chiefs, and set themselves neatly to cleave the wood. Then also came the women from the well. The swineherd last came with 3 swine, the fattest of the herd. In that fair court he let them feed, and sought Ulysses, greeting him with courteous words. Hast thou, O stranger, found among these Greeks more reverence? Art thou still their mark of scorn? Ulysses, the sagacious, answered thus. Oh that the gods, Eumaeus, would avenge the insolence of those who meditate violent deeds, and make another's house their plotting place, and feel no touch of shame. So talked they with each other. Now appeared Melanthius, keeper of the goats. He brought goats for the suitors' banquet, they were choice beyond all others. With him also came 2 goatherds. In the echoing portico he bound his goats. He saw Ulysses there, and thus accosted him with railing words. Stranger, art thou still here, the palace pest? And begging still, and wilt thou ne'er depart? We shall not end this quarrel, I perceive, till thou hast tried the flavor of my fist. It is not decent to be begging here continually, the Greeks have other feasts. He spake. Ulysses answered not, but shook his head in silence, planning fearful things. Philoetius now, a master herdsman, came, and for the banquet of the suitors led a heifer that had never yeaned, and goats, the fatlings of the flock. They came across the ferry, brought by those whose office is to bear whoever comes from shore to shore. He bound his animals in the sounding porch, and went and, standing by the swineherd, said, "Who, swineherd, is the stranger newly come to this our palace? Of what parents born? And of what race, and where his native land? Unhappy seemingly, yet like a king in person. Sorrowful must be the lot of men who wander to and fro on earth, when even to kings the gods appoint distress." He spake, and, greeting with his offered hand, Ulysses said in winged words aloud, "Stranger and father, hail! And mayst thou yet be happy in the years to come at least. Though held in thrall by many sorrows now, yet thou, all-father Jove, art most austere of all the gods, not sparing even those who have their birth from thee, but bringing them to grief and pain. The sweat is on my brow when I behold this stranger, and my eyes are filled with tears when to my mind comes back the image of Ulysses, who must now, I think, be wandering, clothed in rags like thee, among the abodes of men, if yet indeed he lives and sees the sweet light of the sun. But if that he be dead, and in the abode of Pluto, woe is me for his dear sake. The blameless chief, who when I was a boy gave to me, in the Cephallenian fields, the charge of all his beeves, and they are now innumerable. The broad-fronted race of cattle never would have multiplied so largely under other care than mine. Now other masters bid me bring my beeves for their own feasts. They little heed his son, the palace air, as little do they dread the vengeance of the gods. They long to share among them the possessions of the king, so many years unheard from. But this thought comes to my mind again, and yet again. Wrong were it, while the sun is yet alive, to drive the cattle to a foreign land, where alien men inhabit. Yet 'tis worse to stay and tend another's beeves, and bear this spoil. And long ago would I have fled to some large-minded monarch, since this waste is not to be endured, but that I think still of my suffering lord, and hope that yet he may return and drive the suitors hence. Ulysses, the sagacious, answering, said, Herdsman, since thou dost seem not ill-inclined, nor yet unwise, and I perceive in thee a well-discerning mind, I therefore say, and pledge my solemn oath, Jove, first of gods, be witness, and this hospitable board and hearth of good Ulysses, which has here received me, while thou art within these halls, Ulysses will assuredly return. And, if thou choose to look, thine eyes shall see the suitors slain, who play the master here. And thus the master of the herds rejoined, Stranger, may Jupiter make good thy words. Then shalt thou see what strength is in my arm. Eumaeus also prayed to all the gods, that now the wise Ulysses might return. So talked they with each other, while apart the suitors doomed Telemachus to death, and plotted how to take his life. Just then a bird, an eagle, on the left flew by. High up his talons held a timid dove. And then Amphinomus bespake the rest. O friends, this plan to slay Telemachus must fail. And now repair we to the feast. So spake Amphinomus, and to his words they all gave heed, and hastened to the halls of the divine Ulysses, where they laid their cloaks upon the benches and the thrones, and slaughtering the choice sheep, and fading goats, and porkers, and a heifer from the herd, roasted the entrails, and distributed a share to each. Next mingled they the wine in the large bowls, The swineherd brought a cup. To everyone. Philoetius, chief among the servants, gave from shapely canisters the bread to each. Melanthius poured the wine. Then putting forth their hands, they all partook the ready banquet. With a wise design, Telemachus near the stone threshold placed Ulysses, on a shabby seat, beside a little table, but within the walls of that strong pillared pile. He gave him there part of the entrails, and poured out for him the wine into a cup of gold, and said, "Sit here, and drink thy wine among the rest. And from the insults and assaults of these, it shall be mine to guard thee. For this house is not the common property of all. Ulysses first acquired it, and for me. And you, ye suitors, keep your tongues from taunts, and hands from force, lest there be wrath and strife." He spake. The suitors, as they heard him, bit their pressed lips, wondering at Telemachus, who uttered such bold words. Antinous then, Eupade's son, bespake his fellows thus: "Harsh as they are, let us, O Greeks, endure these speeches of Telemachus. He makes high threats, but had Saturnian Jove allowed, we should, ere this, and in these very halls, have quieted our loud-tongued orator." So spake the suitor, but Telemachus heeded him not. Then through the city came the heralds with a hallowed hecatomb, due to the gods. The long-haired people thronged the shady grove of Phoebus, archer god. Now when the flesh was roasted and was drawn from off the spits, and each was given his share, they held high festival. The men who served the banquet gave Ulysses, where he sat, a portion equal to their own, for so his own dear son Telemachus enjoined. Yet did not Pallas cause the haughty crew of suitors to refrain from stinging taunts, that so the spirit of Laertes' son might be more deeply wounded. One there was among the suitors, a low-thoughted wretch. Tisippus was his name, and his abode was Samos. Trusting in his father's wealth, he wooed the wife of the long-absent king, Ulysses. To his insolent mates he said, "Hear me, ye noble suitors, while I speak. This stranger has received an equal share, as is becoming. For it were not just, nor seemly to pass by, in such a feast, the guests, whoe'er they may be, that resort to this fair mansion of Telemachus. I also will bestow on him a gift of hospitality, and he in turn may give it to the keeper of the bath, or any other of the menial train that serve the household of Ulysses here." So speaking, with his strong right hand he flung a bullock's foot, which from a canister hard by he plucked. Ulysses gently bowed his head, and shunned the blow, and grimly smiled. The missile struck the solid wall, and then Telemachus rebuked the suitor thus: "Tisippus, well hast thou escaped with life, not having hit the stranger, who himself shrank from the blow. Else had I pinned thee through with my sharp spear. Instead of wedding feast, thy father would have celebrated here thy funeral rites. Let no man in these halls bear himself insolently in my sight. Hereafter, for my reason now is ripe to know the right from wrong. I was of late a child, and now it is enough to bear that ye should slay our sheep, and drink our wine, and eat our bread, for what can one man do against so many? Cease this petty war of wrong and hatred, but if ye desire to take my life, 'tis well, 'twere better so. And rather would I die by violence than live to see these most unmanly deeds. Guests driven away, and women servants hauled through these fair rooms by brutal wassailers. He ended, and the assembly all sat mute. Till Agelaus spake, Damastor's son. O friends! Let no man hear with carping words gainsay what is so rightly said, nor yet insult the stranger more, nor one of those who serve the household of the godlike chief Ulysses in his palace. I would say this word in kindness to Telemachus and to his mother, may it please them both, while yet the hope was cherished in your hearts, that wise Ulysses would return, no blame could fasten on the queen that she remained unwed, and resisted those who came to woo her in the palace. Better so, had he come home again. Yet now, 'tis clear, he comes no more. Go then, Telemachus, and, sitting by thy mother, bid her wed the noblest of her wooers, and the one who brings the richest gifts. And thou possess thy father's wealth in peace, and eat and drink at will, while she shall find another home. And thus discreet Telemachus replied. Nay, Agelaus, for I swear by Jove, and by my father's sufferings, who has died, or yet is wandering, far from Ithaca, that I do nothing to delay the choice and marriage of my mother. I consent that she become the wife of whom she list, and him who offers most. But I should feel great shame to thrust her forth against her will, and with unfilial speeches. God forbid. He ended here, and Pallas, as he spake, to inextinguishable laughter moved the suitors. There they sat with wandering minds. They swallowed morsels foul with blood. Their eyes were filled with tears, their hearts foreboded woe. Then spake the godlike Theoclymenus. Unhappy men! What may this evil be that overtakes you? Every brow and face, and each one's lower limbs are wrapped in night. And moans arise, and tears are on your cheeks. The walls and all the graceful cornices between the pillars are bedropped with blood. The portico is full, these halls are full of shadows, hastening down to Erebus. Amid the gloom, the sun is blotted out from heaven, and fearful darkness covers all. He spake, and loud they laughed. Eurymachus, the son of Polybus, in answer said, the stranger prattles idly. He is come from some far land. Conduct him through the door, young men, and send him to the marketplace, since all things here are darkened to his eyes. Then spake the godlike Theoclymenus. Eurymachus, from thee I ask no guide. For I have eyes and ears, and 2 good feet, and in my breast a mind as sound as they. And by the aid of these I mean to make my way without. For clearly I perceive a coming evil, which no suitor here will yet escape, no one who, in these halls of the great chief, Ulysses, treats with scorn his fellow man, and broods o'er guilty plans. He spake, and, hastening from that noble pile, came to Piraeus, in whose house he found a welcome. All the suitors, as he went, looked at each other, and, the more to vex Telemachus, kept laughing at his guests. And thus an insolent youth among them said, no man had ever a worse set of guests than thou, Telemachus. For what a wretch that wandering beggar is, who always wants his bread and wine, and is unfit for work, and has no strength, in truth, a useless load. Upon the earth he treads. The other guest rises to play the prophet. If thou take my counsel, which I give thee for thy good, let them at once be put on board a bark, Of many oars, and we will send them hence. To the Sicilians. They will bring a price. So talked the suitors, but he heeded not their words, and, looking toward his father, held his peace, expecting when he would lay hands upon that insolent crew. Penelope, sage daughter of Icarius, took her place right opposite upon a sumptuous seat, and heard the words of every man who spake within the hall. They held that midday feast with laughter, a luxurious feast it was, and mirthful. Many victims had been slain to furnish forth the tables. But no feast could be more bitter than the later one, to which the goddess and that valiant man would bid the guilty crew of plotters soon. Book. Chapter 21. The bending of the bow of Ulysses. Proposal of Penelope to the suitors to contend for her hand with the bow and arrows of Ulysses, their ineffectual attempts to bend the bow, management of Ulysses to obtain the bow, which he bends with ease, and sends an arrow through the 12 rings set up in a row for the purpose. Pallas, the goddess of the azure eyes, woke in the mind of sage Penelope, the daughter of Icarius, this design: to put into the suitors' hands the bow and grey steel rings, and to propose a game that in the palace was to usher in the slaughter. So she climbed the lofty stair up from the hall, and took in her plump hand the fair carved key. Its wards were wrought of brass, and ivory was the handle. Soon she reached the furthest room with her attendant maids. There lay the treasures of Ulysses, brass and gold, and steel divinely wrought. There lay his bow unstrung. There lay his quiver charged with arrows. Many were the deadly shafts it held, a stranger's gift, who met him once in Lacedaemon, Iphitus by name, the son of Eurytus, and like the gods in presence. In Mycenae met the twain, and in the mansion of Orsilochus the warlike. Thither had Ulysses come to claim a debt from all the region round. For rovers from Mycenae to their ships had driven and carried off from Ithaca 300 sheep and those who tended them. For this Ulysses, though a stripling yet, came that long voyage, on an embassy sent by his father and the other chiefs. And Iphitus had come in search of steeds, which he had lost, 12 mares, and under them 12 hardy mules, their foals. That errand brought the doom of death upon him. For he came, in journeying, to the abode of Hercules, the mighty hero son of Jupiter, famed for his labors, who, in his own house, slew Iphitus, the stranger. Cruel wretch, who reverenced not the vengeance of the gods, nor what was due to his own board, at which he placed his guest, and slew him afterward. And in his stables kept the goodly mares. 'Twas when this guest was seeking for his steeds, he met Ulysses, and bestowed on him the bow, which mighty Eurytus once bore, and dying in his lofty palace left the weapon to his son. Ulysses gave in turn a trenchant sword and massive lance, a pledge of kindly hospitality, begun, but not continued till they sat each at the other's table. For the son of Jove first took the life of him who gave the bow, the godlike son of Eurytus. That bow Ulysses, when he went to war in his black galleys, never took with him, but left it in his palace, to be kept in memory of a beloved friend, and only bore it in his own domain. Now when the glorious lady reached the room, and stood upon the threshold, wrought of oak, and polished by the workman's cunning hand, who stretched the line upon it, and set up its posts, and hung its shining doors, she loosed with a quick touch the thong that held the ring. Put in the key, and with a careful aim, struck back the sounding bolts. As when a bull roars in the field, such sound the beautiful doors. Struck with the key, gave forth, and instantly they opened to her. Up the lofty floor she stepped, where stood the coffer that contained the perfumed garments. Reaching forth her hand, the queen took down the bow that hung within its shining case, and sat her down, and laid the case upon her knees, and, drawing forth the monarch's bow, she wept aloud. As soon as that new gush of tears had ceased to fall, back to the hall she went, and that proud throng of suitors, bearing in her hand the bow, unstrung, and quiver, where the arrows lay, many and deadly. Her attendant maids brought also down a coffer, where were laid much brass and steel, provided by the king for games like these. The glorious lady then, in presence of the suitors, stood beside the columns that upheld the stately roof. She held a lustrous veil before her cheeks, and, while on either side of her a maid stood modestly, bespake the suitors thus: "Hear, noble suitors, ye who throng these halls, and eat and drink from day to day, while long my husband has been gone, your sole excuse for all this lawlessness the claim ye make, that I become a bride. Come then, for now a contest is proposed. I bring to you the mighty bow that great Ulysses bore. Who are among you he may be whose hand shall bend this bow, and send through these 12 rings an arrow, him I follow hence, and leave this beautiful abode of my young years, with all its plenty, though its memory, I think, will haunt me even in my dreams." She spake, and bade the master of the swine, the good Eumaeus, place the bow and rings of hoary steel before the suitor train. In tears he bore the bow and laid it down. The herdsman also wept to see again his master's bow. Antinous called to both with a loud voice, and chid them angrily: "Ye silly rustics, who can never see beyond the hour, why trouble with your tears the lady who had grief enough besides for her lost husband? Sit and share the feast in silence, or go forth and leave the bow. A difficult contest it will be for us. Nor, as I think, will this fair bow be bent with ease, since surely there is no man here such as Ulysses was. I saw him once, while but a child, and still remember him. He spake, yet in his secret heart believed that he should bend the bow, and send a shaft through all the rings. And yet he was the first to taste the steel, an arrow from the hand of the great chief Ulysses, whom he wronged in his own palace, and to equal wrong encouraged others. Then Telemachus rose in his sacred might, and thus began: "Alas! It must be that Saturnian Jove has made me lose my wits. Wise as she is, my mother promises to leave her home and follow someone else, and yet I laugh and am delighted in my foolish heart. Come then, since such a contest is proposed, ye suitors, and for such a woman too. The like is not in all the lands of Greece, Argos, Mycenae, or the hallowed shore of Pylos, or in Ithaca itself, or the dark mainland coast. Ye know it well. Why should I praise my mother? Come then, all. Let there be no excuses for delay, nor longer leave the bow untried, that we may see the event. I too am moved to try. And if I bend the bow, and send a shaft through all the rings, my gracious mother then Will not, to my great grief, renounce her home. And, following another, leave me here. Although my prowess even now might win the glorious prizes that my father won. He spake and, rising, from his shoulders took the purple cloak, and laid the trenchant sword aside. And first he placed the rings of steel in order, opening for them in the ground a long trench by a line, and stamping close the earth around them. All admired the skill with which he ranged them, never having seen the game before. And then he took his place upon the threshold, and essayed the bow. And thrice he made the attempt, and thrice gave o'er. Yet hoping still to draw the cord, and send an arrow through the rings. He would have drawn the bow at the fourth trial, but a nod given by his father caused him to forbear, though eager for the attempt. And then again the princely youth bespake the suitors thus. Well, this is strange. I may hereafter prove a craven and a weakling, or perchance am yet too young, and cannot trust my arm to do me right against the man who first assaults me. Come then, ye whose strength excels my own, and try the bow, and end the strife. He spake, and setting down the bow to lean against the firm smooth panels of the wall, and the swift shaft against the bow's fair curve, he took again his seat upon the throne, from which he rose. And then Eupade's son Antinous, to the crowd of suitors said, Rise one by one, my friends, from right to left. Begin where he begins who pours the wine. So spake Antinous, and the rest approved. Then rose Leodes, son of Enops, first. He was their seer, and always had his seat beside the ample bowl. From deeds of wrong he shrank with hatred, and was sore incensed against the suitors all. He took the bow and shaft, and, going to the threshold, stood and tried the bow, yet bent it not. It galled his hands, for they were soft, and all unused to such a task. And thus at length he spake. O friends, I bend it not, another hand must try. This bow, upon this very spot, will take from many a prince the breath of life. And better were it thus to die, by far, than, living, fail of that intent for which we haunt this place, and still from day to day assemble. There is many a one whose wish and hope are strong to wed Penelope, the consort of Ulysses. But so soon as he shall see and try the hero's bow, let him with marriage present seek to gain some other bride among the long-robed dames, Achaia's daughters. Let him leave the queen to wed the suitor who shall bring to her the richest gifts, and him whom fate appoints. He spake, and setting down the bow to lean against the firm smooth panels of the wall, and the swift shaft against the bow's fair curve, he took again his seat upon the throne, from which he rose. Antinous then took up the word and answered, and reproached him thus. What words are these, Leodes, that have passed thy lips? Harsh words and fearful, that this bow shall take from many princes here the breath of life, and all because thou hast no power to bend it? Thy good mother bore thee not to draw the bow and send the arrow forth, but others of the noble suitor train are here, by whom this bow shall yet be bent. Then to Melanthius, keeper of the goats, Antinous gave this bidding. Light a fire with speed, Melanthius, in the palace here, and place a seat before it. Lay a fleece upon the seat, and bring us from within an ample roll of fat, that we young men, by warming and anointing, may make soft the bow, and draw the cord, and end the strife. He spake. Melanthius kindled instantly a glowing fire, and near it placed a seat. And on the seat a fleece, and from within brought forth an ample roll of fat, with which the young men, having warmed it, smeared the bow, and tried, but bent it not, too weak by far for such a feat. Antinous kept aloof, he and the godlike youth Eurymachus, two princes who in might excelled the rest. The herdsman of Ulysses meantime left the palace, and with him the swineherd went. And after them Ulysses. When they all were now without the gate and palace court, Ulysses spake to them, and blandly said, Herdsman and swineherd, shall I say to you somewhat, or shall I keep it back? My heart moves me to say it. Should Ulysses come, led by some god, and suddenly, what aid would he receive from you? Would ye take part with him, or with the suitors? Frankly speak, and tell me what your hearts would bid you do. Then answered thus the keeper of the herds. O Father Jove, wouldst thou but grant my wish, and let some god conduct him hither, then shall it be seen what might is in these hands. So also did Eumaeus offer prayer to all the deities, that speedily the wise Ulysses might return. And when the chief perceived in all its truth the thought and purpose of their hearts, he spake and said, Know, then, that I myself am he, at home again, returning in the 20th year, and after many sufferings, to the land that saw my birth. I know that I am come welcome to you alone of all my train of servants, since I hear no others pray for my return. Here, then, what I engage shall be hereafter, if some god o'ercome. For me these arrogant suitors, I will give to each of you a wife and lands, and build for each a house near mine. And ye shall be the friends and brothers of Telemachus thenceforth. And now, that ye may surely know and trust me, I will show a token here. A scar which once the white tooth of a boar made, when long since, on the Parnassian mount, I hunted with Autolycus's sons. Thus having said, he drew from the broad scar the covering rags. They looked and knew it well, and wept, and round Ulysses threw their arms, and kissed in that embrace the hero's head and shoulders, while Ulysses also kissed their heads and hands. The sun would have gone down upon their weeping, but for him. He said, Cease now from tears, lest someone from the hall should see us, and report of us within. Now let us enter, not in company. I first, and ye thereafter, one by one. And let the sign be this, the others all, the haughty suitors, will refuse to me the bow and quiver. When thou bearest it, my noble friend Eumaeus, through the halls, bring it and place it in my hands, and charge the women to make fast the solid doors. And then if any one of them should hear a groan or other noise of men within, let her not issue forth, but silently pursue her task. Meantime be it thy care, my good Philoetius, with a key to lock the portals of the court and fix the chain. Thus having said, into that noble pile he passed again, and took the seat from which he lately rose, and afterward, in turn, entered the servants of the godlike chief. Eurymachus was busy with the bow, turning and warming it before the blaze on both its sides. He could not bend it thus. There came a deep sigh from his boastful heart, and greatly was he vexed, and sadly said, Alas! Great cause of grief indeed is here for me and all. 'Tis not that I lament, So much the losing of the bride, although that also vexes me, there yet remain many fair ladies of the Achaean stock, both in the sea-girt lands of Ithaca and other regions, yet if we be found to fall in strength of arms so far below the great Ulysses that we cannot bend his bow, our sons will hear of it with shame. Eupathe's son, Antinous, answered thus: Not so, Eurymachus, as thou thyself shouldst know. This day is held a solemn feast of Phoebus by the people. Who would draw the bow today? Nay, lay it by in peace, and suffer all the rings to stand as now. For no man, as I think, will dare to come into the palace of Laertes' son, and take them hence. Let him who bears the cup begin to serve the wine, that, having poured part to the gods, we may lay down the bow. And with the morning let Melanthius come, the goatherd, bringing with him from the flock the choicest goats, that we may burn the thighs, an offering to the god of archery, Apollo. Then will we again essay the bow, and bring the contest to an end. So spake Antinous, and they all approved. Then heralds came, and on the suitors' hands poured water. Youths filled up the cups with wine, beginning at the right, and gave to each his share. And when they all had poured apart, and each had drunk, the shrewd Ulysses thus with artful speech bespake the suitor train: Hearken, ye suitors of the illustrious queen, to what my heart is prompting me to say. But chiefly to Eurymachus I make my suit, and to Antinous, who so well hath counsel to lay by the bow and trust the gods. Tomorrow Phoebus will bestow the needed strength on whomsoe'er he will. But let me take that polished bow, and try among you, whether still the power that dwelt in these once pliant limbs abides in them, or whether happily it has passed from me amid my wanderings and a life of want. He spake, and all were vehemently moved with anger, for they feared that he would bend the bow, and thus Antinous, railing, spake: Thou worthless vagabond, without a spark of reason, art thou not content to sit and banquet with the proudest, where no part of all the feast escapes thee, hearing all that we are saying, which no other man, stranger and beggar, is allowed to hear? This good wine makes thee foolish, as wine oft makes those who swallow it too greedily, and drink not with due stint. It maddened once Eurytion, the famed centaur, in the halls of the large-souled Pirithous. He had come among the Lapithae, and when inflamed with wine to madness, in those very halls did lawless deeds. The heroes were incensed. They rushed upon him, dragged him through the porch and out of doors, and there cut off his nose and ears, and he departed, frenzied still, and bearing in bewilderment of mind his punishment, whence war arose between centaurs and men. Yet surely he had brought the evil on himself, when overcome with wine. Such fearful mischief I foretell will light on thee, if thou shouldst bend this bow. Nor canst thou hope for favor here among the people. We will send thee speedily in a black galley to King Echetus, the enemy of humankind, from whom thou shalt find no escape. Drink, then, in peace thy wine, and seek no strife with younger men. Then spake the sage Penelope again: Truly, Antinous, it becomes thee not, nor is it just, to vex the stranger guests who seek the palace of Telemachus. Dost thou, then, think that, should this stranger bend, proud as he is of his great strength of arm, the mighty bow that once Ulysses bore, He leads me hence a bride? No hope of that is in his heart, and let no one of you who banquet here allow a thought like that to vex him. 'Tis a thing that cannot be. Then to the queen, Eurymachus, the son of Polybus, replied, We do not fear, sage daughter of Icarius, that this man will lead thee hence a bride. It cannot be. We fear the speech of men and women both. The very meanest of the Achaean race will say, Degenerate men are these, who seek to wed the consort of a glorious chief, not one of whom can draw the bow he bore. And now there comes a wandering beggar man, who draws the bow with ease, and sends a shaft through all the rings of steel. Thus will they speak, and this will be to us a cause of shame. And then the sage Penelope rejoined, Eurymachus, it cannot be that those should earn the general praise who make the wealth of a most worthy man their spoil, and bring dishonor on his house. The stranger's frame is powerful and well knit, he claims to be of noble parentage. Now let him take the bow, and we will see the event. But this I promise, and will make my promise good. If he should bend it, if Apollo give to him that glory, he shall have from me a tunic and a cloak, fair garments both, and a keen javelin, his defense against both dogs and men, a two-edged sword besides, and sandals for his feet, and I engage to send him whither he desires to go. Then spake discreet Telemachus again, Mother, in all Achaia there is none who has more power than I can claim, to grant or to deny the bow to whom I will. No one of those who rule the rugged coast of Ithaca, or isles where Elis breeds her mares, may interpose to thwart my will. If on the stranger I bestow the bow to be his own, and bid him take it hence, withdraw, O queen, into thy bower, direct thy household tasks, the distaff and the web, and bid thy maiden speed the work. The bow belongs to men, and most to me. For here, within these walls, the authority is mine. The queen, astonished, heard him and withdrew, but kept her son's wise sayings in her heart. And then ascending to her bower, among her maids, she wept her well-beloved lord Ulysses, till the blue-eyed Pallas came, and poured upon her lids the balm of sleep. Meantime the worthy swineherd bore the bow in hand, and all along the palace halls the suitor crew were chiding him aloud. And thus an insolent youth among them spake, Thou awkward swineherd, whither goest thou with the curved bow? Thy own fleet dogs which thou hast reared shall soon devour thee, far from men. And midst thy herds of swine, if we find grace with Phoebus and the other deathless gods. Such were their words. The swineherd where he stood set down the bow in fear, for many a voice called to him in the hall. On the other side shouted Telemachus with threatening words, Nay, father, carry on the bow, nor think to stop at every man's command, lest I, though younger than thyself, cast stones at thee, and chase thee to the fields, for I in strength excel thee. Would that I excelled as far in strength of arm the suitors in these halls. Then would I roughly through the palace gates drive many who are plotting mischief now. He spake, and all with hearty laughter heard his words, and for their sake allowed their wrath against the prince to cool. The swineherd went forward, along the hall, and, drawing near, the wise Ulysses gave into his hands the bow. And then he called the nurse aside, Dame Eurycleia, and bespake her thus, Sage Eurycleia, from Telemachus, I charge thee to make fast the solid doors. And then, if any of the maids should hear a groan or other noise of men within, let her not issue forth, but silently pursue the task in hand, and keep her place. He spake, nor were his words in vain. The dame made fast the doors of that magnificent hall, while silently Philoetius hastened forth, and locked the portals of the high-walled court. A cable of the bark of Byblos lay beneath the portico; it once had served a galley, and with this the herdsman tied the portals, and, returning, took the seat whence he had risen, but ever kept his eye fixed on his lord. Ulysses, meantime, held the bow, and, turning it, intently eyed side after side, and tried each part in turn, for fear that worms, while he was far away, had pierced the horn. At this, a youth among the suitors, turning to his neighbor, said, "Lo, an inspector and a judge of bows. Perhaps he has a bow like that at home, or else would make one like it. How he shifts the thing with busy hands from side to side. The vagabond, well trained in knavish tricks." Then also said another insolent youth, "May he in all things be as fortunate as now, when he shall try to bend that bow." Such was their talk. But when the wary chief had poised and shrewdly scanned the mighty bow, then, as a singer, skilled to play the harp, stretches with ease on its new fastenings a string, the twisted entrails of a sheep, made fast at either end, so easily Ulysses bent that mighty bow. He took and drew the cord with his right hand; it twanged with a clear sound as when a swallow screams. The suitors were dismayed, and all grew pale. Jove in loud thunder gave a sign from heaven. The much-enduring chief, Ulysses, heard with joy the friendly omen, which the son of crafty Saturn sent him. He took up a winged arrow, that before him lay upon a table, drawn; the others still were in the quiver's womb; the Greeks were yet to feel them. This he set with care against the middle of the bow, and toward him drew the cord and arrow notch, just where he sat, and, aiming opposite, let fly the shaft. He missed no ring of all, from first to last. The brass-tipped arrow threaded every one. Then to Telemachus Ulysses said, "Telemachus, the stranger sitting here hath not disgraced thee. I have neither missed the rings, nor found it hard to bend the bow. Nor has my manly strength decayed, as these who seek to bring me to contempt pretend. And now the hour is come when we prepare a supper for the Achaeans, while the day yet lasts, and after supper the delights of song and harp, which nobly grace a feast." He spake, and nodded to Telemachus, his well-beloved son, who girded on his trenchant sword, and took in hand his spear, and, armed with glittering brass for battle, came and took his station by his father's seat. Book. Chapter 22. Death of the Suitors. Antinous slain by an arrow from the bow of Ulysses, who now declares himself, and begins the slaughter. Arms brought to him and to Eumaeus and Philoetius by Telemachus, arms brought to the suitors by Melanthius the goatherd, appearance of Pallas in the shape of Mentor, death of all the suitors, Medon and Phemia spared, the unfaithful serving women hanged. Then did Ulysses cast his rags aside, and, leaping to the threshold, took his stand on its broad space, with bow and quiver filled with arrows. At his feet the hero poured the winged shafts, and to the suitors called, "That difficult strife is ended. Now I take another mark, which no man yet has hit. Now shall I see if I attain my aim. and, by the aid of Phoebus, win renown. He spake. And, turning, at Antinous aimed. The bitter shaft, Antinous, who just then had grasped a beautiful two-eared cup of gold, about to drink the wine. He little thought of wounds and death. For who, when banqueting among his fellows, could suspect that one alone against so many men would dare, however bold, to plan his death, and bring on him the doom of fate? Ulysses struck the suitor with the arrow at the throat. The point came through the tender neck behind. Sideways he sank to earth, his hand let fall the cup. The dark blood in a thick warm stream gushed from the nostrils of the smitten man. He spurned the table with his feet, and spilled the viands. Bread and roasted meats were flung to lie polluted on the floor. Then rose the suitors in a tumult, when they saw the fallen man. From all their seats they rose throughout the hall, and to the massive walls looked eagerly. There hung no buckler there, no sturdy lance for them to wield. They called thus to Ulysses with indignant words: Stranger, in evil hour hast thou presumed to aim at men, and thou shalt henceforth bear part in no other contest. Even now is thy destruction close to thee. Thy hand hath slain the noblest youth in Ithaca. The vultures shall devour thy flesh for this. So each one said. They deemed he had not slain the suitor wittingly, nor did they see, blind that they were, the doom which in that hour was closing round them all. Then with a frown the wise Ulysses looked on them, and said, Dogs! Ye had thought I never would come back from Ilium's coast, and therefore ye devoured my substance here, and offered violence to my maidservants, and pursued my wife as lovers. While I lived, ye dreaded not the gods who dwell in the great heaven, nor feared vengeance hereafter from the hands of men. And now destruction overhangs you all. He spake, and all were pale with fear, and each looked round for some escape from death. Alone Eurymachus found voice, and answered thus: If thou indeed be he, the Ithacan, Ulysses, now return to thine old home. Well hast thou spoken of the many wrongs done to thee by the Achaeans in thy house and in thy fields. But there the man lies slain, who was the cause of all. Antinous first began this course of wrong, nor were his thoughts so much of marriage as another aim, which Saturn's son denied him, to bear rule himself o'er those who till the pleasant fields of Ithaca, first having slain thy son in ambush. But he now has met his fate. Spare, then, thy people. We will afterward make due amends in public for the waste here in thy palace of the food and wine. For each of us shall bring thee 20 beeves, and brass and gold, until thy heart shall be content. Till then we cannot blame thy wrath. Sternly the wise Ulysses frowned, and said, Eurymachus, if thou shouldst offer me all that thou hast, thy father's wealth entire, and add yet other gifts, not even then would I refrain from bloodshed, ere my hand avenge my wrongs upon the suitor crew. Choose then to fight or flee, whoever hopes escape from death and fate, yet none of you will now, I think, avoid that bitter doom. He spake. At once their knees and head grew faint. And thus Eurymachus bespake the rest. This man, O friends, to his untamable arm will give no rest, but with that bow in hand and quiver will send forth from where he stands his shafts, till he has slain us all. Prepare for combat then, and draw your swords, and hold the tables up against his deadly shafts, and rush together at him as one man, and drive him from the threshold through the door. Then, hurrying through the city, let us sound the alarm, and soon he will have shot his last. He spake, and, drawing his keen two-edged sword of brass, sprang toward him with a dreadful cry. Just as the great Ulysses, sending forth an arrow, smote the suitor on the breast. Beside the nipple, the swift weapon stood. Fixed in his liver, to the ground he flung the sword, and, reeling giddily around the table, fell. He brought with him to earth the viands and the double cup, and smote the pavement with his forehead heavily, and in great agony. With both his feet he struck and shook his throne, and darkness came over his eyes. Then rushed Amphinomus against the glorious chief, and drew his sword to thrust him from the door. Telemachus o'ertook him, and between his shoulders drove a brazen lance. Right through his breast it went, and he fell headlong, with his forehead dashed against the floor. Telemachus drew back, and left his long spear in Amphinomus, lest, while he drew it forth, someone among the Achaeans might attack him with the sword, and thrust him through or hew him down. In haste he reached his father's side, and quickly said, "Now, father, will I bring to thee a shield, 2 javelins, and a helmet wrought of brass, well fitted to the temples. I will case myself in armor, and will also give arms to the swineherd, and to him who tends the beeves, for men in armor combat best." And wise Ulysses answered, "Bring them then, and quickly, while I yet have arrows here, for my defense, lest, when I am alone, they drive me from my station at the door." He spake, obedient to his father's word. Telemachus was soon within the room, in which the glorious arms were laid. He took 4 bucklers thence, 8 spears, and helmets 4 of brass, each darkened with its horsehair crest, and bore them forth, and quickly stood again beside his father. But he first encased his limbs in brass. His followers also put their shining armor on, and took their place beside the wise Ulysses, eminent in shrewd devices. He, while arrows yet were ready to his hand, with every aim brought down a suitor. Side by side they fell. But when the shafts were spent, the archer king leaned his good bow beside the shining wall, against a pillar of the massive pile, and round his shoulders slung a 4-fold shield, and crowned his martial forehead with a helm wrought fairly, with a heavy horsehair crest, that nodded gallantly above, and took in hand the 2 stout lances tipped with brass. In the strong wall there was a postern door, and, near the outer threshold of the pile, a passage from it to a narrow lane, closed with well-fitting doors. Ulysses bade the noble swineherd take his station there, and guard it well, as now the only way of entrance. Agelos called aloud to all his fellows, and bespake them thus: "Friends, will no one among you all go up to yonder postern door, and make our plight known to the people? Then the alarm would spread, and this man haply will have shot his last." Melanthius, keeper of the goats, replied, "Nay, noble Agelos, 'tis too near the palace gate. The entrance of the lane is narrow, and a single man, if brave, against us all might hold it. I will bring arms from the chamber to equip you all. For there within, and nowhere else, I deem Ulysses and his son laid up their arms. Thus having said, the keeper of the goats, Melanthius, climbed the palace stairs, and gained the chamber of Ulysses. Taking thence 12 shields, as many spears, as many helms of brass, with each its heavy horsehair plume. He came, and gave them to the suitors' hands. Then sank the hero's heart, and his knees shook, as he beheld the suitors putting on their armor, and uplifting their long spears. The mighty task appalled him, and he thus bespake Telemachus with winged words. Telemachus, some woman here, or else Melanthius makes the battle hard for us. And thus discreet Telemachus replied. Father, I erred in this. I was the cause. And no one else, I left the solid door ajar, the spy was shrewder far than I. Now, good Eumaeus, shut the chamber door, and see if any of the palace maids have brought these arms, or if I rightly fix the guilt upon Melanthius, Dolius' son. So talked they with each other, while again Melanthius, stealing toward the chamber, thought to bring yet other shining weapons thence. The noble swineherd marked him as he went, and quickly drawing near Ulysses said, Son of Laertes, nobly born and wise, the knave whom we suspect is on his way up to thy chamber. Tell me now, I pray, and plainly shall I make an end of him, if I may prove the stronger man, or bring the wretch into thy presence to endure the vengeance due to all the iniquities plotted by him against thee in these halls. Ulysses, the sagacious, answered thus. Telemachus and I will keep at bay the suitors in this place, however fierce their onset, while ye two bind fast his hands and feet behind his back, and bringing him into the chamber, with the door made fast behind you, tie him with a double cord, and draw him up a lofty pillar close to the timbers of the roof, that, swinging there, he may live long and suffer grievous pain. He spake, they hearkened and obeyed, and went up to the chamber unperceived by him, who stood within and searched a nook for arms. On each side of the entrance, by its posts, they waited for Melanthius. Soon appeared the goatherd at the threshold of the room, bearing a beautiful helmet in one hand, and in the other a broad ancient shield, defaced by age and mold. Laertes once, the hero, bore it when a youth, but now long time it lay unused, with gaping seams. They sprang and seized the goatherd, dragging him back to the chamber by the hair. And there they cast him, in an agony of fear, upon the floor, and bound his hands and feet with a stout cord behind his back, as bade the great Ulysses, much enduring son of old Laertes. Round him then they looped a double cord, and swung him up beside a lofty pillar, till they brought him near the timbers of the roof. And then didst thou, Eumaeus, say to him in jeering words, Melanthius, there mayst thou keep watch all night on a soft bed, a fitting place for thee. And when the mother of the dawn shall come upon her golden seat from ocean streams, thou wilt not fail to see her. Thou mayst then drive thy goats hither for the suitors' feast. They left him in that painful plight, and put their armor on, and closed the shining door, and went, and by Ulysses, versed in wiles, stood breathing valor. For were they who stood upon that threshold, while their foes within were many and brave. Then Pallas, child of Jove, drew near, like Mentor both in shape and voice. Ulysses saw her, and rejoiced and said, Come, Mentor, to the aid of one who loves and has befriended thee, thy peer in age. Thus said Ulysses, but believed he spake. To Pallas, scatterer of hosts, fierce shouts came from the suitors in the hall, and first thus Agelaus railed, Damastor's son. Mentor, let not Ulysses wheedle thee to join him, and make war on us. For this our purpose is, and it will be fulfilled. When by our hands the father and the son are slain, thou also shalt be put to death for this attempt, and thy own head shall be the forfeit. When we shall have taken thus thy life with our good weapons, we will seize on all thou hast, on all thy wealth within thy dwelling or without, and mingling it with the possessions of Ulysses, leave within thy palaces no son of thine, or daughter living, and no virtuous wife of thine, abiding here in Ithaca. He spake, and woke new anger in the heart of Pallas, and she chid Ulysses thus. Ulysses, thou art not, in might of arm and courage, what thou wert when waging war 9 years without a pause against the men of Troy for Helen's sake, the child of Jove. And many didst thou slay in deadly strife. And Priam's city, with its spacious streets, was taken through thy counsels. How is it that, coming to thy own possessions here, and thy own palace, thou dost sadly find thy ancient valor fail thee in the strife against the suitors? Now draw near, my friend, and stand by me, and see what I shall do. And own that Mentor, son of Alcimus, amid a press of foes requites thy love. She spake, but gave not to Ulysses yet the certain victory, for she meant to put to further proof the courage and the might both of Ulysses and his emulous son. To the broad palace roof she rose, and sat in shape a swallow. Agelaus now, Damastor's son, cheered on with gallant words his friends. So also did Amphimedon, Eurynomus, and Demoptolemus, Polyctor's son, Pisander, and with these sagacious Polybus. These 6 excelled in valor all the suitors who survived, and they were fighting for their lives. The bow and the fleet shafts had smitten down their peers. Thus to his fellows Agelaus spake. O friends, this man will now be forced to stay his fatal hand. See, Mentor leaves his side after much empty boasting, and those 4 are at the entrance gate alone. Now aim at him with your long spears, not all at once. Let 6 first hurl their weapons, and may Jove grant that we strike Ulysses down, and win great glory for the others at his side. We care but little, if their leader fail. He spake, they hearkened. Eagerly they cast their lances. Pallas made their aim to err. One struck a pillar of the massive pile. One struck the paneled door, one ashen shaft, heavy with metal, rang against the wall. And when they had escaped that flight of spears, hurled from the crowd, the much-enduring man, Ulysses, thus to his companions said, Now is the time, my friends, to send our spears into the suitor crowd, who, not content with wrongs already done us, seek our lives. He spake, and, aiming opposite, they cast their spears. The weapon which Ulysses flung slew Demoptolemus, his son struck down Euryades. The herdsman smote to death Pisander, and the swineherd Elatus. These at one moment fell, and bit the dust of the broad floor. Back flew the suitor crowd to a recess, and after them the 4 rushed on, and plucked their weapons from the dead. Again the suitors threw their spears, again Did Pallas cause their aim to err? One struck a pillar of the massive pile, and one the paneled door, another ashen shaft, heavy with metal, rang against the wall. Yet did the weapon of Amphimedon strike lightly on the wrist Telemachus. The brass just tore the skin. Ctesippus grazed the shoulder of Eumaeus with his spear. Above the shield, the spear flew over it, and fell to earth. Then they who stood beside the sage Ulysses, versed in wiles, once more flung their keen spears. The spoiler of walled towns, Ulysses, slew Eurydamas, his son. Struck down Amphimedon, the swineherd took the life of Polybus. The herdsman smote Ctesippus, driving through his breast the spear, and called to him, and gloried o'er his fall. O son of Polytherses, prompt to rail, beware of uttering, in thy foolish pride, big words hereafter, leave it to the gods. Mightier are they than we. See, I repay the hospitable gift of a steer's foot, which once the great Ulysses from thy hand received, as he was passing through this hall. Thus spake the keeper of the horned herd. Meantime, Ulysses slew Damastor's son with his long spear, in combat hand to hand. Telemachus next smote Evenor's son, Leocritus. He sent the brazen spear into his bowels, through his body passed the weapon, and he fell upon his face. His forehead struck the floor. Then Pallas held on high her fatal aegis. From the roof she showed it, and their hearts grew wild with fear. They fled along the hall as flees a herd of kine, when the swift gadfly suddenly has come among them, and has scattered them. In springtime, when the days are growing long. Meantime, like falcons with curved claws and beaks, that, coming from the mountain summits, pounce upon the smaller birds, and make them fly close to the fields among the snares they dread, and seize and slay, nor can the birds resist, or fly, and at the multitude of prey the fowlers' hearts are glad. So did the four smite right and left the suitors hurrying through the palace hall, and fearful moans arose, as heads were smitten by the sword, and all the pavement swam with blood. Leodes then sprang forward to Ulysses, clasped his knees, and supplicated him with winged words. I come, Ulysses, to thy knees. Respect and spare me. Never have I said or done among the women of thy household aught that could be blamed, and I essayed to check the wrongs of other suitors. Little heed they gave my counsels, nor withheld their hands from evil deeds, and therefore have they drawn upon themselves an evil fate. But I, who have done nothing, I their soothsayer, must I too die? Then is there no reward among the sons of men for worthy deeds? Ulysses, the sagacious, frowned and said, If then, in truth, thou wert as thou dost boast, a soothsayer among these men, thy prayer within these palace walls must oft have been, that far from me might be the blessed day of my return, and that my wife might take with thee her lot, and bring forth sons to thee. And therefore shalt thou not escape from death. He spake, and seizing with his powerful hand a falchion lying near, which from the grasp of Agelos fell when he was slain, just at the middle of the neck he smote Leodes, while the words were on his lips. And the head fell, and lay amid the dust. Phemius, the son of Turpius, skilled in song, alone escaped the bitter doom of death. He by constraint had sung among the train of suitors, and was standing now beside the postern door, and held his sweet-toned lyre. And pondered whether he should leave the hall, and sit before the altar of the great Hercean Jove, where, with Laertes, once Ulysses oft had burned the thighs of beeves. Or whether he should fling himself before Ulysses, as a suppliant, at his knees. This to his thought seemed wisest, to approach Laertes' son, and clasp his knees. He placed his sweet harp on the floor, between the cup and silver-studded seat, and went and clasped the hero's knees, and said in winged words, I come, Ulysses, to thy knees. Respect and spare me. It will be a grief to thee. Hereafter, shouldst thou slay a bard, who sings for gods and men alike. I taught myself this art. Some god has breathed into my mind songs of all kinds, and I could sing to thee as to a god. Oh, seek not then to take my life. Thy own dear son Telemachus will bear me witness that not willingly, nor for the sake of lucre did I come to sing before the suitors at their feasts, and in thy palace, but was forced to come by numbers and by mightier men than I. He ceased, Telemachus, the mighty, heard, and thus bespake his father at his side. Refrain, smite not the guiltless with the sword, and be the herald, Medon, also spared, who in our palace had the care of me through all my childhood. If he be not slain already by Philoetius, or by him who tends the swine, or if he have not met thyself, when thou wert ranging through the hail. He spake, and the sagacious Medon heard, as crouching underneath a throne he lay, wrapped in the skin just taken from a steer, to hide from the black doom of death. He came from where he lay, and quickly flung aside the skin, and, springing forward, clasped the knees of the young prince, and said in winged words, Dear youth, behold me here. Be merciful. Speak to thy father, that he put not forth his sword to slay me, eager as he is for vengeance, and incensed against the men who haunt these halls to make his wealth a spoil, and in their folly hold thyself in scorn. He spake, the sage Ulysses smiled and said, Be of good cheer, since this my son protects and rescues thee. Now mayst thou well perceive, and say to other men, how much more safe is doing good than evil. Go thou forth out of this slaughter to the open court, thou and the illustrious bard, and sit ye there, while here within I do what yet I must. He spake. They moved away and left the hall, and by the altar of Almighty Jove sat looking round them, still in fear of death. Meantime, Ulysses passed with searching look o'er all the place, to find if yet remained a single one of all the suitor crew alive, and skulking from his bitter doom. He saw that all had fallen in blood and dust, many as fishes on the shelving beach, drawn from the hoary deep by those who tend the nets with myriad meshes, poured abroad upon the sand, while panting to return to the salt sea they lie, till the hot sun takes their life from them. So the suitors lay heaped on each other. Then Ulysses took the word, and thus bespake Telemachus. Go now, Telemachus, and hither call the nurse, Dame Eurycleia. I would say somewhat to her that comes into my thought. So spake the chief. Telemachus obeyed the word, and smote the door, and called the nurse. Come hither, ancient dame, who hast in charge to oversee the women in their tasks. My father calls thee, and would speak with thee. He spake, nor flew the word in vain. She flung apart the portals of those stately rooms, and came in haste Before her went the prince. Among the corpses of the slain they found Ulysses, stained with blood, and grimed with dust. As when a lion, who has just devoured a bullock of the pasture, moves away, a terror to the sight, with breast and cheeks all bathed in blood. So did Ulysses seem, his feet and hands steeped in the blood of men. She, when she saw the corpses and the pools of blood, and knew the mighty task complete, was moved to shout for joy. Ulysses checked her eager zeal, and said in winged words, "Rejoice in spirit, dame, but calm thyself, and shout not. To exult aloud o'er those who lie in death is an unholy thing. The pleasure of the gods, and their own guilt, brought death on these. For no respect had they to any of their fellow men, the good or evil, whosoever he might be. That came to them, and thus on their own heads they drew this fearful fate. Now name to me the women of the palace, let me know who is disloyal, and who innocent." Then thus the well-beloved nurse replied, "My son, I will declare the truth. There dwell here in thy palace 50 serving maids, whom we have taught to work, to comb the fleece, and serve the household. 12 of these have walked the way of shame. To me they give no heed, nor to Penelope herself. Thy son has just now grown to manhood, and the queen has never suffered him to rule the maids. But let me now, ascending to her room, the royal bower, apprise thy wife, to whom some deity has sent the gift of sleep." Ulysses, the sagacious, answered thus, "Wake her not yet, but go and summon all the women who have wrought these shameful deeds." He spake. The matron through the palace went to seek the women, and to bid them come. Meanwhile, Ulysses called Telemachus, the herdsman and the swineherd, to his side, and thus commanded them with winged words, "Begin to carry forth the dead, and call the women to your aid. And next make clean, with water and with thirsty sponges, all the sumptuous thrones and tables. When ye thus have put the hall in order, lead away the serving maids, and in the space between the kitchen vault and solid outer wall, smite them with your long swords till they give up the ghost, and lose the memory evermore of secret meetings with the suitor train." He spake. The women came, lamenting loud, with many tears, and carried forth the dead, leaning upon each other as they went, and placed them underneath the portico of the walled court. Ulysses gave command, hastening their task, as all unwillingly they bore the corpses forth, with water next, and thirsty sponges in their hands, they cleansed the sumptuous thrones and tables. Then the prince Telemachus, with shovels cleared the floor, the herdsman and the swineherd aiding him, and made the women bear the rubbish forth. And now when all within was once again in seemly order, they led forth the maids from that fair pile into the space between the kitchen vault and solid outer wall, a narrow space from which was no escape. And thus discreet Telemachus began, "I will not take away these creatures' lives by a pure death, these who so long have heaped reproaches on my mother's head and mine, and played the wanton with the suitor crew." He spake, and made the hawser of a ship fast to a lofty shaft, the other end he wound about the kitchen vault. So high he stretched it that the feet of none who hung on it might touch the ground. As when a flock of broad-winged thrushes or wild pigeons strike a net within a thicket, as they seek their perch, and find unwelcome durance there. So hung the women with their heads a row, and cords about their necks, that they might die a miserable death. A little while, and but a little, quivered their loose feet in air. They led Melanthius from the hall, and through the porch, cut off his nose and ears, wrenched out the parts of shame, a bloody meal for dogs, and in their anger from the trunk, lopped hands and feet. Then having duly washed their feet and hands, they came into the hall. And to Ulysses, they had done their work. And then to the dear nurse Ulysses said, "Bring sulphur, dame, the cure of noxious air, and fire, that I may purge the hall with smoke. And go, and bid Penelope come down, with her attendant women, and command that all the handmaids of the household come." And thus in turn Dame Eurycleia spake. "Well hast thou said, my son, but suffer me to bring thee clothes, a tunic and a cloak. Nor with those rags on thy broad shoulders stand in thine own palace. It becomes thee not." Ulysses, the sagacious, answered thus: "First let a fire be kindled in this hall." He spake, and Eurycleia, the dear nurse, obeyed, and brought the sulphur and the fire. Ulysses steeped in smoke the royal pile, both hall and court. The matron, passing through the stately palace of Ulysses, climbed the stair to find and summon all the maids. And forth they issued, bearing in their hands torches, and, crowding round Ulysses, gave glad greeting, seized his hands, embraced him, kissed his hands and brow and shoulders. The desire to weep for joy o'ercame the chief, his eyes o'erflowed with tears, he sobbed, he knew them all. Book. Chapter 23. Ulysses and Penelope after the slaughter. Descent of Penelope to the hall, her doubts of the identity of Ulysses removed by evident tokens given by Ulysses, her transport at their removal, his narrative of his adventures, departure of Ulysses with his son, the herdsman, and the swineherd, to the country. Up to the royal bower the matron went, with an exulting heart, to tell the queen that her beloved husband was within. With knees that faltered not, and quick light step, she went, and, standing by her mistress, said, "Awake, Penelope, dear child, and see with thine own eyes what thou hast pined for long. Ulysses has returned, thy lord is here, though late, and he has slain the arrogant crew of suitors, who disgraced his house, and made his wealth a spoil, and dared insult his son." And thus discreet Penelope replied: "The gods, dear nurse, have made thee mad, for they have power to change the wisest men to fools, and make the foolish wise, and they have warped thy mind once sound. How canst thou mock me thus, amidst my sorrows, with such idle tales? Why wake me from the pleasant sleep that closed my lids so softly? Never have I slept so sweetly since Ulysses went from me to that bad city, which no tongue should name. Go, then, return into the lower rooms. Had any of my women save thyself brought such a message to disturb my sleep, I would have sent her back into the hall with angry words, thy years are thy excuse." But Eurycleia, the dear nurse, rejoined, "Nay, my dear child, I mock thee not. Most true it is that thy Ulysses has returned, and here he is at home, as I have said. The stranger whom they scoffed at in the hall is he, and long Telemachus has known that he was here, but wisely kept from all his father's secret, till he should avenge upon those violent men their guilty deeds." She ended, and her mistress, overjoyed, sprang from her couch, embraced the aged dame, and wept, and said to her in winged words, "Tell me, dear nurse, and truly. If indeed Ulysses have returned as thou hast said. How smote he those proud suitors, he alone? And they so many, gathered in the hall. And thus the well-beloved nurse replied. I saw it not, nor knew of it. I heard only the moanings of the slain, while we, the maids, affrighted, sat in a recess of that well-vaulted chamber. The firm doors closed us all in, until at length thy son, sent by his father, called me forth. I found Ulysses standing midst the dead that lay heaped on each other, everywhere along the solid pavement. Thou wouldst have rejoiced to see him like a lion with the stains of slaughter on him. Now the suitors lie before the portals of the palace court, and he has kindled a great fire, and steeps in smoke the noble hall. He bade me come to call thee. Follow me, that ye may give your hearts to gladness, for ye have endured great sorrows both, and your long-cherished hope is now fulfilled. He hath returned alive to his dear home, and finds thee and his son yet in his palace, and hath terribly avenged himself upon the guilty men who under his own roof have done him wrong. Then spake the sage Penelope again. Beloved nurse, exult not overmuch, nor rashly boast. Well is it known to thee, were he to come beneath this roof again, how welcome he would be to all, but most to me and to the son to whom we gave his being. Yet thy tidings are not true. Someone of the immortals must have slain the arrogant suitors, angry to behold their foul injustice and their many crimes. For no respect had they to mortal man. Good he might be, or bad, whome'er they met. And therefore have they made an evil end. But my Ulysses must have perished far from Ithaca, cut off from his return. Then Eurycleia, the dear nurse, rejoined. What words are these, my child, that pass thy lips? Say'st thou, then, that thy husband, who now stands upon thy hearthstone, never will return? O slow of faith! But thou wert ever thus. Come, then, I give a certain proof. I saw myself, when he was at the bath, the scar left on him by the white tusk of a boar. And would have told thee, but he laid his hands upon my mouth, and would not suffer me to bear the tidings, such his forecast was. Now follow me, I give my life in pledge. If I deceive thee, slay me ruthlessly. Then spake discreet Penelope again. Dear nurse, though thou in many things art wise, think not to scan the counsels of the gods, who live forever. Yet will we descend, and meet my son, and look upon the slain, and see the avenger by whose hand they fell. She spake, and from the royal bower went down, uncertain whether she should stand aloof, and question there her lord, or haste to him, and clasp his hands in hers and kiss his brow. But having passed the threshold of hewn stone, entering she took her seat right opposite Ulysses, in the full glow of the fire. Against the other wall Ulysses sat, beside a lofty column with his eyes cast down, and waiting for his highborn wife to speak when she had seen him. Long she sat in silence, for amazement overpowered her senses. Sometimes, looking in his eyes, she saw her husband there, and then again, clad in those sordid weeds, she knew him not. Then spake Telemachus, and chid her thus. Mother, unfeeling mother, heart of heart, art thou, how else couldst thou remain aloof? How keep from taking, at my father's side, thy place, to talk with him, and question him? No other wife could bring herself to bear Such distance from a husband, just returned. After long hardships, in the 20th year of absence, to his native land and her mother. Thy heart is harder than a stone. And thus the sage Penelope replied. Dear child, my faculties are overpowered with wonder, and I cannot question him, nor even speak to him, nor fix my looks upon his face. But if it be indeed Ulysses, and he have returned, we soon shall know each other. There are tokens known to both of us, to none but him and me. She ended, and the much-enduring chief Ulysses, smiling at her words, bespake Telemachus at once, in winged words. Suffer thy mother, O Telemachus, to prove me. She will know me better soon. My looks are sordid, and my limbs are wrapped in tattered raiment, therefore does she think meanly of me, and cannot willingly believe that I am he. But let us now consider what most wisely may be done. He who hath slain, among a tribe of men, a single one with few to avenge his death, flees from his kindred and his native land. But we have slain the champions of the realm, the flower of all the youth of Ithaca. Therefore, I pray thee, think what shall be done. And then disarreate Telemachus replied. Look thou to that, dear father, for they say that thou of all mankind wert wont to give the wisest counsels, none of mortal birth. In this was deemed thy peer. We follow thee with cheerful hearts, nor will our courage fail. I think, in aught that lies within our power. Ulysses, the sagacious, answered thus. Then will I tell thee what I deem most wise. First take the bath, and then array yourselves in tunics, bid the palace maidens choose fresh garments. Let the godlike bard, who bears the clear-toned harp, be leader, and strike up a melody to prompt the festive dance, that all may say who hear it from without, whether the passers-by or dwellers near, it is a wedding. Else throughout the land the rumor of the slaughter we have wrought among the suitors may have spread before we reach our wooded farm, and there consult beneath the guidance of Olympian Jove. He spake, they hearkened and obeyed. They took the bath, and then they put their garments on. The maids arrayed themselves. The godlike bard took the curved harp, and woke in all the love of melody, and of the graceful dance. The spacious pile resounded to the steps of men and shapely women in their mirth. And one who stood without was heard to say, someone, no doubt, has made the long-wooed queen his bride at last. A worthless woman she, who could not, for the husband of her youth, keep his fair palace till he came again. Such words were said, but they who uttered them knew little what had passed. Eurycleia, the matron of the palace, meantime took magnanimous Ulysses to the bath. In his own dwelling, smoothed his limbs with oil, and threw a gorgeous mantle over him, and tunic. Pallas on the hero's head shed grace and majesty. She made him seem taller and statelier, made his locks flow down in curls like blossoms of the hyacinth, as when a workman skilled in many arts, and taught by Pallas and Minerva, twines a golden border round the silver mass. A glorious work. So did the goddess shed grace o'er his face and form. So from the bath he stepped, like one of the immortals, took the seat from which he rose, right opposite Penelope, and thus addressed the queen. Lady, the dwellers of the Olympian heights have given thee an impenetrable heart, beyond all other women. Sure I am, no other wife could bring herself to bear Such distance from a husband just returned. After long hardships, in the 20th year of absence, to his native land and her. Come, nurse, prepare a bed, whereby myself I may lie down, an iron heart is hers. To this the sage Penelope replied. Nay, sir, 'tis not through pride or disregard, or through excess of wonder, that I act thus toward thee. Well do I remember thee, as thou wert in the day when thy good ship bore thee from Ithaca. Bestir thyself, Dame Eurycleia, and make up with care a bed without the chamber, which he framed with his own hands. Bear out the massive bed, and lay upon it seemly coverings, fleeces and mantles for his nightly rest. She spake to try her husband, but, displeased, Ulysses answered thus his virtuous queen. O woman, thou hast said unwelcome words. Who hath displaced my bed? That task were hard for long experienced hands, unless some god had come to shift its place. No living man, even in his prime of years, could easily have moved it, for in that elaborate work there was a mystery. It was I myself who shaped it, no one else. Within my court there grew an olive tree with full-leaved boughs. A tall and flourishing tree, its massive stem was like a column. Round it I built up a chamber with cemented stones until the walls were finished. Then I framed a roof above it, and put on the well-glued doors, close-fitting. Next I lopped the full-leaved boughs, and, cutting off the trunk above the root, smoothed well the stump with tools, and made of it a post to bear the couch. I bored the wood with wimbles, placed on it the frame, and carved the work till it was done, inlaying it with silver, gold, and ivory. I stretched upon it thongs of oxhide brightly dyed in purple. Now, O wife, I cannot know whether my bed remains as then it was, or whether someone from the root has hewn the olive trunk, and moved it from its place. He spake, and her knees faltered and her heart was melted as she heard her lord recount the tokens all so truly. And she wept, and rose, and ran to him, and flung her arms about his neck, and kissed his brow, and said, Ulysses, look not on me angrily. Thou who in other things art wise above all other men. The gods have made our lot a hard one, jealous lest we should have passed our youth together happily, and thus have reached old age. I pray, be not incensed, nor take it ill that I embraced thee not as soon as I beheld thee. For my heart has ever trembled lest someone who comes into this isle should cozen me with words. And they who practice fraud are numberless. The Argive Helen, child of Jupiter, would ne'er have listened to a stranger's suit, and loved him, had she known that in the years to come the warlike Greeks would bring her back to her own land. It was a deity who prompted her to that foul wrong. Her thought was never of the great calamity which followed, and which brought such woe on us. But now, since thou, by tokens clear and true, hast spoken of our bed, which human eye has never seen save mine and thine, and those of one handmaiden only, Actorus, her whom my father gave me when I came to this thy palace, and who kept the door of our close chamber, thou hast won my mind to full belief, though hard it was to win. She spake, and he was moved to tears. He wept, as in his arms he held his dearly loved and faithful wife, as welcome as the land to those who swim the deep, of whose stout bark Neptune has made a wreck amidst the waves. tossed by the billow and the blast. And few are those who from the hoary ocean reach the shore, their limbs all crested with the brine. These gladly climb the sea beach, and are safe. So welcome was her husband to her eyes. Nor would her fair white arms release his neck. And there would rosy-fingered morn have found both weeping, but the blue-eyed Pallas planned that thus it should not be. She stayed the night, when near its close, and held the golden morn long in the ocean deeps, nor suffered her to yoke her steeds that bring the light to men, Lampas and Phaethon, swift steeds that bear the morning on her way. Ulysses then, the man of forecast, thus bespake his queen. Not yet, O wife, have we attained the close of all our labors. One remains which yet I must achieve, toilsome and measureless in difficulty. For so prophesied the spirit of Tiresias, on the day when to the abode of Pluto I went down to ask the seer concerning the return of my companions, and my own. But now seek we our couch, dear wife, that, softly laid, we may refresh ourselves with welcome sleep. Then spake in turn the sage Penelope, whenever thou desirest it thy couch shall be made ready, since the gods vouchsafe to bring thee back into thy pleasant home, and to thy native land. But now that thou hast spoken of it, and some deity is prompting thee, declare what this new task may be. Hereafter I shall hear of it, no doubt, nor were it worse to know it now. Ulysses, the sagacious, answered thus. Dear wife, why wilt thou ask? Why press me thus? Yet will I tell thee truly, nor will keep aught from thee, though thou wilt not gladly hear. Nor I relate. Tiresias bade me pass through city after city, till I found a people who know not the sea, nor eat their food with salt, who never yet beheld the red-prowed galley, nor the shapely oars, which are the wings of ships. And this plain sign he gave, nor will I keep it back from thee, that when another traveler whom I meet shall say it is a winnowing fan I bear on my stout shoulder, there he bade me plant the oar upright in earth, and offer up to monarch Neptune there a ram, a bull, and sturdy boar, and then, returning home, burn hallowed hecatombs to all the gods who dwell in the broad heaven, each one in turn. At last will death come over me, afar from ocean, such a death as peacefully shall take me off in a serene old age, amid a people prosperous and content. All this, the prophet said, will come to pass. And then the sage Penelope rejoined. If thus the immortals make thy later age the happier, there is hope that thou wilt find escape from evil in the years to come. So talked they with each other. Meantime went Eurycleia, attended by the nurse, and in the light of blazing torches dressed, with soft fresh drapery abed. And when their busy hands had made it full and high, the aged dame withdrew to take her rest in her own chamber, while Eurycleia, who kept the royal bower, upheld a torch, and thither led the pair, and, when they both were in the chamber, went her way. They took their place delighted in the ancient bed. The prince, the herdsman, and the swineherd ceased meantime to tread the dance, and bade the maids cease also, and within the palace rooms, dark with night's shadow, sought their place of rest. Then came the time of pleasant mutual talk, in which that noblest among women spake of wrongs endured beneath her roof from those who came to woo her, an insatiate crew, who made of beeves and fatlings of the flock large slaughter. And drained many a winecask dry. Then nobly born Ulysses told what woes his valor brought on other men, what toils and suffering he had borne. He told her all. And she, delighted, heard him, nor did sleep light on her eyelids till his tale was done. And first he told her how he overcame the people of Ciconia, how he passed thence to the rich fields of the race who feed upon the lotus, what the Cyclops did, and how upon the Cyclops he avenged the death of his brave comrades, whom the wretch had piteously slaughtered and devoured, and how he came to Aeolus, and found a friendly welcome, and was sent by him upon his voyage, yet 'twas not his fate to reach his native land. A tempest caught his fleet, and far across the fishy deep bore him away, lamenting bitterly. And how he landed at Telepolis among the Laestrygonians, who destroyed his ships and warlike comrades, he alone in his black ship escaping. Then he told of Circe, her deceit and many arts, and how he went to Pluto's dismal realm in his good galley, to consult the soul of him of Thebes, Tiresias, and beheld all his lost comrades and his mother, her who brought him forth, and trained him when a child. And how he heard the sirens afterward, and how he came upon the wandering rocks, the terrible Charybdis, and the crags of Scylla, which no man had ever passed in safety. How his comrades slew for food the oxen of the sun, how Jupiter, the thunderer, with a bolt of fire from heaven, smote his swift bark, and how his gallant crew all perished, he alone escaped with life. And how he reached Ogygia's isle, he told, and met the nymph Calypso, who desired that he would be her husband, and long time detained and fed him in her vaulted grot, and promised that he ne'er should die, nor know decay of age, through all the days to come. Yet moved she not the purpose of his heart. And how he next through many hardships came to the Phaeacians, and they welcomed him, and honored him as if he were a god, and to his native country in a bark sent him with ample gifts of brass and gold, and raiment. As he uttered this last word, sleep softly overcame him, all his limbs lay loose in rest, and all his cares were calmed. The blue-eyed Pallas had yet new designs. And when she deemed Ulysses was refreshed with rest and sleep, in that accustomed bed, she called the morning, daughter of the dawn, to rise from ocean in her car of gold, and shed her light on men. Ulysses rose from his soft couch, and thus enjoined his spouse. O wife! Enough of misery have we borne already, thou in weeping for my long unhappy absence, I for years withheld by Jupiter and all the other gods from my return to this dear land. Although I pined for home, now since upon this couch we take the place so earnestly desired, take thou the charge of all that I possess here in the palace, for the herds and flocks which those high-handed suitors have devoured, I shall seize many others as a spoil. The rest the Greeks will bring me, till my stalls are filled again. I hasten to my farm, embowered in trees, to greet the aged man, my excellent father, who continually grieves for me. Prudent as thou art, I give this charge. A rumor, with the rising sun, will quickly go abroad that I have slain the suitors in the palace. Now withdraw, thou and thy maidens, to the upper room, and sit and look not forth, nor ask of aught. So spake the chief, and on his shoulders braced his glorious armor. Then he called his son, the herdsman, and the swineherd, bidding them to take in hand their weapons. They obeyed. And, having armed themselves in brass, they threw the portals open. As they all went forth, Ulysses led the way. The early light was on the earth, but Pallas, shrouding them in darkness, led them quickly through the town. Book. Chapter 24. Conclusion. The souls of the suitors conducted to Hades by Mercury, Agamemnon and Achilles in Hades, their meeting with the souls of the suitors. And narrative of Amphimedon, meeting and mutual recognition of Ulysses and his father in the orchard at Ithaca, insurrection of the Ithacans, with Eupates, the father of Antinous at their head, the revolt quelled, Eupates slain by Laertes and a lasting peace made between Ulysses and his subject. Cyllenian Hermes summoned forth the souls of the slain suitors. In his hand he bore the beautiful golden wand, with which at will he shuts the eyes of men, or opens them from sleep. With this he guided on their way the ghostly route. They followed, uttering a shrilly wail, as when a flock of bats, deep in a dismal cavern, fly about, and squeak, if one have fallen from the place where, clinging to each other and the rock, they rested. So that crowd of ghosts went forth, with shrill and plaintive cries. Before them moved beneficent Hermes through those dreary ways. And past the ocean stream they went, and past Leucadia's rock, the portals of the sun, and people of the land of dreams, until they reached the fields of asphodel, where dwell the souls, the bodiless forms of those who die. And there they found the soul of Peleus' son, his friend Patroclus, and the blameless chief Antilochus, and Ajax, who excelled in stature and in form all other Greeks, save the great son of Peleus. These were grouped around Achilles. Then approached the ghost of Agamemnon, Atreus' son. He seemed in sorrow, and around him others stood, who in the palace of Aegisthus met their fate and died. The son of Peleus took the word, and spake to Agamemnon thus: Atrides, we had thought that Jove, who wields the thunder, favored thee, through all thy years. Beyond all other men, thou didst bear rule over so many and such valiant men. Upon the plain of Troy, where we of Greece endured such sufferings. Yet all too soon the cruel doom of death, which no man born of woman can escape, has fallen on thee. Oh, if amid the honors of thy sway that doom had overtaken thee, while yet in Troy's far realm, then would the assembled Greeks have built a tomb to thee. Thou wouldst have left a heritage of glory to thy son. Now hast thou died a most unhappy death. And then the soul of Agamemnon said: Fortunate son of Peleus, godlike chief Achilles, who didst die upon the field of Ilium, far from Argos, while there fell around thee many of the bravest sons of Troy and Greece, who fought for thee, and thou wert lying in thy mighty bulk, amid whirlwinds of dust, forgetful evermore of horsemanship. All that day long we fought, nor stayed our hands till Jove, to part us, sent a hurricane, when we had borne thee thence, and brought thee to the fleet, upon a bier. We laid thee, pouring o'er thy shapely limbs warm water, and anointing them with oil. Round thee the Achaeans stood in tears, hot tears, and cut their hair away from ocean's depth. Thy mother, when she heard the tidings, rose with her immortal sea-nymphs. Mournfully came o'er the waves the sound of their lament. Trembled the Greeks with fear, and, rushing forth, would have sought refuge in their roomy ships. If Nestor, wise in ancient lore, and known for counsels ever safe, had not restrained their haste, and thus declared his prudent thought. Stay, Argives, youths of Greece. Think not of flight. It is his mother, from the sea she comes to her dead son, and brings her deathless nymphs. He spake, his words withheld the valiant Greeks from flight. And now around thee came and stood the daughters of the Ancient of the Deep, lamenting bitterly upon thy course. They put ambrosial robes. The Muses 9 bewailed thee with sweet voices, answering each other. Then wouldst thou have seen no one of all the Argive host with eyes unwet. The Muses' song so moved them. 17 days and nights we mourned thee, both the immortal ones and mortals. On the 18th day we gave thy body to the fire, and at the pile slew many fatling ewes, and many an ox with crooked horns, in raiment of the gods. The fire consumed thee midst anointing oils and honey. Many heroes of our host, in armor and in chariots, or on foot, contended round thy funeral pyre in games. And mighty was the din. And when at length the fires of Vulcan had consumed thy flesh, we gathered up at morning thy white bones. Achilles, pouring over them pure wine and fragrant oils, thy mother brought a vase of gold, which Bacchus gave, she said, the work of Vulcan the renowned, and in it now, illustrious son of Peleus, thy white bones are lying, and with thine are mingled those of dead Patroclus Menoetiades. Apart we placed the ashes of thy friend Antilochus, whom thou didst honor most, after the slain Patroclus. O'er all these, the sacred army of the warlike Greeks built up a tomb magnificently vast upon a cape of the broad Hellespont, there to be seen far off upon the deep by those who now are born, or shall be born in future years. Thy mother, having first prayed to the gods, appointed noble games within the circus, for the Achaean chiefs. Full often have I seen the funeral rites of heroes, when the youth, their chieftain dead, were girded for the games, and strove to win the prizes. But I most of all admired those which the silver-footed Thetis gave to mark thy burial, who wert loved by all the immortals. So thou hast not lost by death thy fame, Achilles, and among the tribes of men thy glory will be ever great. But what hath it availed me to have brought the war on Ilium to an end, since Jove doomed me to be destroyed on my return, slain by Aegisthus and my guilty wife? So talked they with each other. Now approached the herald Argus Queller, bringing down the souls of suitors by Ulysses slain. Both chiefs moved toward them, wondering at the sight. The soul of Agamemnon, Atreus' son, knew well-renowned Amphimedon, whose birth was from Melanthius, and by whom he once was welcomed to his house in Ithaca. And him the son of Atreus first bespake. Amphimedon, what sad mischance has brought you all, who seem like chosen men, and all of equal age, into these drear abodes beneath the earth? 'Twere hard indeed to find in a whole city nobler forms of men. Has Neptune wrecked you in your ships at sea, with fierce winds and huge waves, or armed men smitten you on the land, while carrying off their beeves and sheep, or fighting to defend your wives and city? Tell me, for I claim to have been once your guest. Rememberest thou I lodged in thy own palace when I came, with godlike Menelaus, and besought Ulysses to unite his gallant fleet to ours, and sail for Troy. A whole month long were we in crossing the wide sea, and hard we found the task to gain as our ally Ulysses, the destroyer of walled towns. The soul of dead Amphimedon replied, Atrides Agamemnon, far renowned, and king of men, I well remember all of which thou speakest. I will now relate. And truly, how we met our evil end. We wooed the wife of the long-absent chief Ulysses. She rejected not nor yet granted our suit, detested as it was. But, meditating our destruction, planned this shrewd device. She laid upon the loom within her rooms a web of delicate threads, ample in length and breadth, and thus she said to all of us, young princes, who are come to woo me, since Ulysses is no more my noble husband, urge me not, I pray, to marriage, till I finish in the loom, that so my threads may not be spun in vain. A funeral vesture for the hero chief Laertes, when his fatal hour shall come, with death's long sleep. Else some Achaean dame might blame me, should I leave without a shroud him who in life possessed such ample wealth. Such were her words, and easily they won upon our generous minds. So went she on, weaving that ample web, and every night unraveled it by torchlight. 3 full years she practiced thus, and by the fraud deceived the Grecian youths. But when the hours had brought the 4th year round, a woman who knew all revealed the mystery, and we ourselves saw her unraveling the ample web. Thenceforth constrained, and with unwilling hands she finished it. And when at length she showed the vesture she had woven, the broad web that she had bleached to brightness like the sun's, or like the moon's, some hostile deity brought back Ulysses to a distant nook of his own fields, and to his swineherd's lodge. And thither also came in his black ship his son, returning from the sandy coast of Pylos. Thence the twain, when they had planned to slay the suitors, came within the walls of the great city, first Telemachus, and after him Ulysses, with his guide, the swineherd. He was clad in sordid weeds, and seemed a wretched beggar, very old, propped on a staff. In that disguise of rags, none knew him, as he suddenly appeared. Not even the oldest of us all. Harsh words and blows we gave him. He endured them all. A while with patience, smitten and reviled. In his own palace, moved at length by Jove, he and his son Telemachus bore off the shining weapons from the hall, to lie in a far chamber, and barred all the doors. Then, prompted by her husband's craft, the queen proposed a game of archery, with bow and rings of hoary steel, to all of us ill-fated suitors. This drew on our death. Not one of us could bend that sturdy bow. None had the strength. But as it passed from us into Ulysses' hands, we loudly chid the bearer, and forbade him, but in vain. Telemachus alone with stern command bade him deliver it. When in his hands the much-enduring chief, Ulysses, took the bow, he drew the string with ease, and sent a shaft through all the rings. He sprang and stood upon the threshold. At his feet he poured the winged arrows, cast a terrible glance around him, and laid King Antinous dead. Then sent the fatal shafts at those who stood before him. Side by side they fell and died. Some god, we saw, was with them, as they rushed upon us mightily, and chased us through the palace, slaying us on every side. And fearful were the groans of dying men, as skulls were cloven, and the pavement swam with blood. Such, Agamemnon, was the fate by which we perished. Now our bodies lie neglected at the palace. For not yet our kindred, dwelling in our homes, have heard the tidings, nor have come to cleanse our wounds from the dark blood, and lay us on the bier with tears, such honors as are due the dead. In turn the soul of Agamemnon spake: Son of Laertes, fortunate and wise Ulysses, thou by feats of eminent might and valor dost possess thy wife again, and nobly minded is thy blameless queen, the daughter of Icarius, faithfully remembering him to whom she gave her troth, while yet a virgin. Never shall the fame of his great valor perish, and the gods themselves shall frame, for those who dwell on earth, sweet strains in praise of sage Penelope. Not such was she who treacherously slew the husband of her youth, she of the house of Tyndarus. Her name among mankind shall be the hateful burden of a song, and great is the dishonor it has brought on women, even the faithful and the good. So talked they with each other, standing there in Pluto's realm beneath the vaulted earth. Meantime Ulysses, hastening from the town, came to the fair fields of Laertes, tilled with care. Laertes, after years of toil, acquired them. There his dwelling stood. A shed encircled it, where ate and sat and slept the servants of the household, who fulfilled his slightest wish. An old Sicilian dame was there, who waited, in that distant spot, on her old master with assiduous care. And then Ulysses to his followers said: Go into that fair dwelling, and with speed slay for our feast the fattest of the swine. I go to prove my father. I would learn whether he knows me when he sees my face, or haply knows me not, so long away. He spake, and laid his weapons in their hands. Straight toward the house they went. Ulysses passed into the fruitful orchard, there to prove his father. Going down and far within the garden plot, he found not Dolius there, nor any of the servants, nor his sons. All were abroad, old Dolius leading them. They gathered thorns to fence the garden grounds. There, delving in that fertile spot, around a newly planted tree, Ulysses saw his father only, sordidly arrayed in a coarse tunic, patched and soiled. He wore patched greaves of bullock's hide upon his thighs, a fence against the thorns, and on his hands gloves, to protect them from the prickly stems of bramble, and upon his head a cap of goatskin. There he brooded o'er his grief. Him when the much-enduring chief beheld, wasted with age and sorrow worn, he stopped beside a lofty pear tree's stem and wept, and pondered whether he should kiss and clasp his father in his arms, and tell him all, how he had reached his native land and home, or question first and prove him. Musing thus, it pleased him to begin with sportive words. And thus resolved, divine Ulysses drew near to his father, stooping at his task, and loosening the hard earth about a tree. And thus the illustrious son accosted him: O aged man! There is no lack of skill in tending this fair orchard, which thy care keeps flourishing. No growth is there of fig, vine, pear, or olive, or of plants that grow in borders, that has missed thy friendly hand. Yet let me say, and be thou not displeased, thou art ill cared for, burdened as thou art with years, and squalid, and in mean attire. It cannot be that for thy idleness thy master treats thee thus, nor is there seen aught servile in thy aspect, in thy face or stature. Thou art rather like a king. Thou seemest one who should enjoy the bath and banquet, and lie soft, for this befits old men like thee. Now say, and tell me true, who may thy master be? Whose orchard this, which thou dost tend? And, more than this, declare, for much I long to know, if I am come to Ithaca, as I just now was told by one who met me as I came, a man not overwise, who would not stop to tell what I desired to learn, nor bear to hear my questions, when I asked him if a guest of mine were living yet in health, or dead, and in the realm of Pluto. Let me speak of him, and mark me well, I pray. I lodged once, in my native land, a man who came into my house, and never stranger yet more welcome was than he. He was by birth of Ithaca, he said, Laertes' son, and grandson of Arcesius. Him I led beneath my roof, and hospitably lodged, and feasted in the plenty of my home, and gave such gifts as might become a host. 7 talents of wrought gold, a silver cup, all over rough with flowers, 12 single cloaks, 12 mats, 12 mantles passing beautiful, and tunics 12, and, chosen by himself, 12 graceful damsels, skilled in household arts. And then his father answered, shedding tears, Thou art indeed, O stranger, in the land of which thou dost inquire, but wicked men and lawless now possess it. Thou hast given thy generous gifts in vain. Yet hadst thou found Ulysses living yet in Ithaca, then would he have dismissed thee recompensed with gifts and liberal cheer, as is the due of him who once has been our host. Yet say, and truly say, how many years have passed since thou didst lodge my son, if he it was thy hapless guest, whom, far away from home, and all his friends, the creatures of the deep, and the foul birds of air, and beasts of prey, already have devoured. No mother mourned his death and wrapped him in his shroud, nor I, his father. Nor did chaste Penelope, his consort nobly dowered, bewail the man she loved upon his bier with eyes dissolved in tears, as fitting was, an honor due to those who die. Now, further, truly tell, for I would learn, what is thy name, and whence thou comest, from what tribe, thy city where, and who thy parents? Where is the good ship at anchor which has brought thee and thy friends? Or hast thou landed from another's bark, which put thee on the shore and left the isle? Ulysses, the sagacious, answered thus, I will tell all and truly. I am come from Alba, a stately dwelling there is mine. Aphidas is my father, son of royal Polypemon, and my name Eperitus. Some deity has warped my course astray from the Sicanian coast, and brought me hitherward against my will. My bark lies yonder, stationed by the field, far from the city. This is the 5th year since parting with me thy Ulysses left my native land for his ill-fated man. Yet there were flights of birds upon the right of happy presage as he sailed, and I dismissed him cheerfully, and cheerfully he went. We hoped that we might yet become each other's guests, exchanging princely gifts. He spake, and a dark cloud of sorrow came over Laertes. With both hands he grasped the yellow dust, and over his white head shed it with piteous groans. Ulysses felt his heart within him melted. The hot breath rushed through his nostrils as he looked upon his well-beloved father, and he sprang and kissed and clasped him in his arms, and said, "Nay, I am he, my father. I myself am he of whom thou askest. I am come to mine own country in the 20th year. But calm thyself, refrain from tears, and grieve no more, and let me tell thee, in a word. I have slain all the suitors in my halls, and so avenged their insolence and crimes." And then Laertes spake again, and said, "If now thou be Ulysses, my lost son, give some plain token, that I may believe." Ulysses, the sagacious, answered thus. "First, then, behold with thine own eyes the scar, which once the white tusk of a forest bore, inflicted on Parnassus, when I made the journey thither, by thy own command, and by my gracious mother's, to receive gifts which her father, King Autolycus, once promised, when he came to Ithaca. And listen to me further, let me name the trees which in thy well-tilled orchard grounds thou gavest me. I ask them all of thee, when by thy side I trod the garden walks. A little boy, we went among the trees, and thou didst name them. Of the pear 13, and of the apple 10 thou gavest me, and 40 fig trees. And thou didst engage to give me 50 rows of vines, each row of growth to feed the winepress. Grapes are there of every flavor when the hours of Jove shall nurse them into ripeness from on high." He spake. A trembling seized the old man's heart and knees, as he perceived how true were all the tokens which Ulysses gave. He threw round his dear son his arms. The hardy chief, Ulysses, drew him fainting to his heart. But when the old man's strength revived, and calm came o'er his spirit, thus he spake again. "O Father Jove, assuredly the gods dwell on the Olympian height. Since we behold the arrogant suitors punished for their crimes, yet much I fear lest all the Ithacans throng hither, and send messages to rouse against us all the Cephallenian states." Ulysses, the sagacious, answered thus. "Take courage. Let no thought like that disturb thy mind, but let us hasten to the house. Telemachus is there, with whom I sent the herdsman and the swineherd, bidding them make ready with all speed our evening meal." Thus talked the twain, and toward the dwelling took their way, and entering the commodious rooms, they found Telemachus, and by his side the herdsman and the keeper of the swine, dividing for the feast the plenteous meats, and mingling the dark wine. Then to the bath came the Sicilian dame, and ministered to the large-souled Laertes, and with oil anointed him, and wrapped a sumptuous cloak about him. Pallas gave the monarch's limbs an ampler roundness, taller to the sight. He stood, and statelier, as he left the bath. His son beheld with wonder in his eyes. So like a god Laertes seemed. And thus Ulysses said to him in winged words, "Someone among the ever-living gods hath surely shed, O father, on thy form and aspect all this grace and majesty." The sage Laertes answered, "Father Jove, and Pallas and Apollo. Would that I were now as when I took the citadel of Nericus, the strongly built, beside the seashore of Epirus, leading on my Cephallenians with such strength as then. Armed for the fray, I would have met and fought the suitors in the palace yesterday, and struck down many lifeless in the hall. And greatly would thy spirit have rejoiced. So talked they with each other. When they all ceased from their task, and saw their meal prepared, they sat them down in order on the thrones and seats, and each put forth his hand and shared the banquet. Now approached an aged man, Dolius, attended by his sons, who came weary with toil, for the Sicilian dame, the nurse who reared them, went and summoned them. She who in his late age with faithful care cherished the father. These, when at the board they saw Ulysses, and knew who he was, stopped in the hall astonished. Instantly Ulysses called to them with friendly words. Sit at the board, old man. Let none of you give way to blank amazement. Know that we, though keen our appetite for this repast, have waited long, expecting your return. He spake, and Dolius sprang with outstretched arms, and seized Ulysses by the hand, and kissed the wrist, and thus in winged words he spake. Dear master, since thou art returned to us, who longed and yet expected not to see thy face again, since some divinity has led thee hither, hail! And great may be thy happiness, and may the gods bestow all blessings on thee. But declare, for I would gladly know, if sage Penelope have heard the tidings yet of thy return, or must we send them by a messenger? Ulysses, the sagacious, answered thus. My aged friend, she knows already all. Why wouldst thou take that care upon thyself? He spake, and Dolius on a polished seat sat down, but round the great Ulysses came his sons, and welcomed him with loving words, and hung upon his hand. And then they took their places by their father. So they sat beneath Laertes' roof, and banqueted. Now through the city meantime swiftly ran the rumor that the suitors all had met a bloody death. No sooner had men heard the tidings than they came with cries and moans before the palace, moving to and fro. Each carried forth his dead, and gave to each his funeral rites, except to those who came from distant cities. These they put on board swift-sailing galleys of the fishermen, that they might bear them home. And then they came sorrowing together in the marketplace. There, when the assembly now was full, arose Eupates and addressed them. In his heart was sorrow, that could never be consoled, for his slain son Antinous, who was first to fall before Ulysses. Weeping rose the father, and harangued the assembly thus. Great things, indeed, my friends, hath this man done for us Achaeans. Many valiant men he gathered in his ships and led abroad, and lost his gallant ships, and lost his men. And now, returning, he has put to death the best of all the Cephallenian race. Come, then, and ere he find a safe retreat in Pylos, or in hallowed Elis, where the Epeans rule, pursue him. Endless shame will be our portion else, and they who live in future years will hear of our disgrace, if we avenge not on these men of blood the murder of our sons and brothers. Life will not be sweet to me, and I would go at once, and gladly, down among the dead. Rise, then, and fall upon them ere they flee. So spake he, weeping, and the Greeks were moved with pity as they heard him. Now appeared the herald Medon and the sacred bard, as, rising from the sleep of night, they left the palace of Ulysses. They stood forth amid the multitude, who all beheld with wonder. Then sagacious Medon spake. Give ear, ye men of Ithaca, and know that not without the approval of the gods. Ulysses hath done this. I saw, myself, one of the immortals taking part with him. In all things like to mentor. Now the god, standing before Ulysses, strengthened him for combat, and now drove the routed band of suitors through the hall. In heaps they fell. He spake, and all who heard were pale with fear. The aged hero, Halitherses, son of Master, then came forward. He alone knew what was past and what was yet to come. And, wisely judging, to the assembly said, Hear now my words, ye men of Ithaca. Through your own wrong all this has come to pass. To me ye would not hearken, nor obey. When Mentor, shepherd of the people, spake, on the mad doings of your sons ye put no curb, nor checked the guilty insolence that dared to waste the substance and insult the consort of a man of eminent worth, who, so they thought, would never more return. Now be it as I counsel, let us not go forth to draw down evil on our heads. He spake, but more than half the assembly rushed abroad with shouts. The others kept their place together. Ill the augur's speech had pleased the most. Eupates had persuaded them. They flew to arms, and when they had put on the glittering brass, they mustered in close ranks before the spacious city. At their head Eupates led them on, who madly deemed himself the avenger of his slaughtered son. Yet he from that encounter never more was to return, his fate o'ertook him there. Then Pallas thus addressed Saturnian Jove. Our father, son of Saturn, king of kings, tell me, I pray, the purpose of thy heart. Yet unrevealed. Shall there be cruel war and deadly combats, or wilt thou ordain that these shall henceforth dwell in amity? And cloud-compelling Jove made answer thus. My child, why ask me? Was it not with thee a cherished purpose, that, returning home, Ulysses amply should avenge himself upon the suitors? Do, then, as thou wilt. Yet this, as the most fitting, I advise. Now that the great Ulysses has avenged his wrongs, let there be made a faithful league with oaths, and let Ulysses ever reign. And we will cause the living to forget their sons and brothers slain, and all shall dwell in friendship as they heretofore have dwelt. And there shall be prosperity and peace. He spake, and eager as she was before, encouraged by his words, the goddess plunged down from the summits of the Olympian mount. Now when they all had feasted to the full, the much-enduring chief, Ulysses, said, Go, one of you, and see if they are near. He spake, a son of Dolius at his word went forth, and, coming to the threshold, stopped. He saw them all at hand, and instantly bespake Ulysses thus, with winged words. They are upon us, we must arm at once. He spake, they rose, and quickly were in arms. For were Ulysses and his friends, and 6 the sons of Dolius. Old Laertes then, and Dolius, put on armor with the rest. Grey-headed as they were, for now their aid was needed. When they all had clad themselves in shining brass, they threw the portals wide, and sallied forth, Ulysses at their head. Now Pallas, daughter of almighty Jove, drew near them. She had taken Mentor's form and Mentor's voice. The much-enduring chief, Ulysses, saw her and rejoiced, and said to his beloved son, Telemachus, Now wilt thou, of thyself, Telemachus, bethink thee, when thou minglest in the fray, that tries men's valor, not to cast disgrace upon thy forefathers, a race renowned for manly daring over all the earth. And thus discreet Telemachus replied. Nay, if thou wilt, my father, thou shalt see that by no lack of valor shall I cast, as thou hast said, dishonor on thy race. Laertes heard them, and rejoiced, and said, Oh, what a day for me, ye blessed gods! Is this? With what delight I see my son and grandson rivals on the battlefield. And then the blue-eyed Pallas, drawing near. Laertes, said, Son of Arcesius, loved by me beyond all others of my friends. Pray to Jove's blue-eyed daughter, and to Jove. And brandish thy long spear, and send it forth. So Pallas spake, and breathed into his frame strength irresistible. The aged chief prayed to the daughter of almighty Jove, and brandished his long spear and sent it forth. It smote Eupaths on the helmet's cheek. The brass stayed not the spear, the blade passed through, and heavily Eupaths fell to earth, his armor clashing round him as he fell. Then rushed Ulysses and his valiant son forward, the foremost of their band, and smote their foes with swords and lancet double-edged, and would have struck them down to rise no more, if Pallas, daughter of the god who bears the aegis, had not with a mighty voice commanded all the combatants to cease. Stay, men of Ithaca! Withhold your hands from deadly combat. Part, and shed no blood. So Pallas spake, and they grew pale with awe and fear-struck. As they heard her words they dropped their weapons all upon the earth. They fled townward as if for life, while terribly the much-enduring chief Ulysses raised his voice, and shouted after them, and sprang upon them as an eagle darts through air. Then Saturn's son sent down a bolt of fire. It fell before his blue-eyed daughter's feet. And thus the goddess to Ulysses called, Son of Laertes, nobly born and wise. Ulysses, hold thy hand. Restrain the rage of deadly combat, lest the god who wields the thunder, Saturn's son, be wroth with thee. She spake, and gladly he obeyed. And then Pallas, the child of aegis-bearing Jove, plighted, in Mentor's form with Mentor's voice, a covenant of peace between the foes.